Welcome. I have a secret. I know something about you. I don't know your name. I don't know your life story. But what do I know? I know you care, whether you believe it or not. You care about your education, your future and your learning. You see, whether it was shoved in your hands by an eager parent or ordered online in a time of crisis, you picked up this book and made it to this first page, and that means you want to take charge of your education. You decided to invest your free time in reflecting on how you study, which is so bloody cool. Being a teen is hard. Genuinely, I salute you. The education system seems to forget that there are 100 other things going on in our lives besides just school. You might be working a job to support your family. You might be juggling friendship drama. You might be figuring out your identity, which is a full-time job in itself. Mental health is just overlooked when it comes to productivity. If you're battling dark clouds in your brain, how could school ever be the #1 priority? Which is why this book is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This book welcomes the multifaceted you and is an invitation to motivate yourself to achieve whatever academic goals you want to have, whether that's turning your predicted A's into a S, or finding a reason to smash a pass in that subject you hate. I've done my best to make this book fun, accessible and actually helpful. I've drawn on examples in my life that helped me slay the exam system and explain techniques that I wish someone had taught me. You don't have to dig into the primary literature of the neuroscience of learning. I've done the basics for you. My name is Jade and I'm a 20-year-old British university student. I achieved all A's, 8s and 9s in my GCSEs and all A's in my A-levels. However, that doesn't make me an expert. I do not have a PhD in study methods or any other official credentials. In fact, neither of my parents went to university, and as I'm the oldest child, I was the guinea pig. I didn't have older siblings who could share their wisdom with me. That's sort of what I hope I can be for you. So this is a guide for students written not by a teacher, a professor or an academic, instead by someone who has been through the process recently and who loves learning. It includes all the realistic tips and tricks I wish I'd known a few years ago. If I can make it through the system and not only survive, but learn to thrive, you can too. I went to a state school just outside London where I felt very uncool for liking learning. I watched many of my peers give up before they even started and saw teachers come and go, sometimes leaving midway through the exam year. In other words, my school was hardly the peak of academia, but I've always cared a lot about learning, and I decided early on that I was really going to try. For as many flaws as the UK education system has, I'm so grateful that we have the chance to learn. I knew I had a choice, to coast along and be done with it, or to tighten my laces, shove my curls behind my ears and work out how to be more efficient. I chose the latter. I was an extremely stressed GCSE student. For those years, I lived in a bubble of pressure from teachers, parents and peers. It was only after I finished my exams that I realized I had been worried for nothing. There were so many things I wish I'd learned earlier. Everything from achieving the right mindset to how to tackle all the content. I began to mentor younger students, and it was fulfilling to share my knowledge and help others. When I was doing my GCSEs, I'd headed to YouTube looking for just that sort of helping hand. All I wanted was advice from older students who had gone through it already to put me at ease. There was nothing. As someone who wasn't into traditional YouTube culture, I was the last person my friends expected to start a channel, and yet there I was, suddenly convinced that I had something the internet needed to hear. I saved up for a camera for a year, split half the cost with my parents as a Christmas present, and felt like I'd found the missing piece to something bigger. Alongside studying for my A-levels, I spent 2 months teaching myself how to edit. In February 2017, I started my YouTube channel Unjaded Jade, driven by the need to share my experiences and create an online space for students to relate to others. My videos follow my academic journey, share honest tips and advice for navigating our school system, and, ultimately, try to inspire a positive mindset where anyone can achieve anything they want. The response I have received over the years has been overwhelming. I get hundreds of messages every day from students who feel more in control of their education. YouTube utterly changed my life. when all I wanted was for it to change those of others. I've always dreamed of compiling my advice into one guide, one that encompasses not only effective revision techniques but the nuances of being a successful, genuinely happy student in whatever academic system you're in. This is a story of productivity and motivation. I made lots of mistakes when I was studying and I have explained them here so you don't have to make them. This is what school never teaches you, how to revise properly and how to not burn out. As I say, I really am no expert, but I do know what worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you too. How to use. The beauty of this book is that it is not mine, it is yours, and you can use it however you want. If you have a bit of time, I recommend reading it from start to finish because the chapters build on one another. But if you're crunched for time, or desperate to work out how timetables work, skip through the pages to your heart's content. I won't judge. Daringly turn to that chapter you need and inhale it until you can breathe new life into how you study. What I do ask is this: come into each chapter not as a passive museum goer at an art exhibition. Don't admire the words and smile at the techniques and agree that it sounds good. Be the artist. Use the chapters as inspiration to prod your own life, to redraw your systems and to create new ways of doing things. Stop after each chapter and answer the put it in practice questions. Go back and reread chapters once you've tried applying them. Reflect on how you view your place in the academic system and the level of pressure you put on yourself. Enter this book and be active, because that is how you will grow. This book is what you make of it. I'm honored you're here. Chapter 1, Motivation. When I got a D in my first A-level chemistry test, I convinced myself that it was bad luck. Even when I spent all night on a simple homework task, I told myself that it would get better. It was only when I got a U in my next test that I almost dropped chemistry on the spot. It was 1 month into year 12 and the rose-tinted glasses of a student back from the summer holidays had faded with the snap of every sheet of paper I added to my ring binder folder. I was taking A-level chemistry, biology, maths and English literature. Chemistry became the bane of my life. Not only is the subject extremely difficult but we were given a brand new teacher. Despite her efforts, I learned nothing. Her explanations tangled the textbook in my mind like a maze and sometimes she wouldn't show up to lessons. It was a mess. I can remember coming home one day, getting out my homework and feeling sick to my stomach that I understood nothing. I was spending triple the time on chemistry than I was on any other subject. I received my first chemistry test back. I could see the red marks on the paper before it got to me, right there, in a bold scribble, D. This is not an awful grade in itself but I was gutted. After scoring highly in chemistry GCSE and spending hours revising only to get most questions wrong, it was a demoralizing start to A-levels. When I got home, the last thing I wanted to do was look at my test paper. I still didn't understand the content. My teacher couldn't explain it in a way that made sense to me and seeing that D grade bordering on a U was enough to convince me I should reconsider taking chemistry after all. After 2 months of failing to understand anything, I overtaught myself into a place of extreme unmotivation because it felt like an invisible contract had been broken. We place so much faith in our teachers to know what they're doing in order to make us feel like we have a chance. A good teacher is like a row of lights illuminating a dark pathway. Teachers don't walk the road for you, but rather point you through the twists and turns in a way that makes you feel like the destination is in reach. Without them, the path is dark. It's easy to stop walking. The next few weeks, I didn't use my free periods to study. I hung out with friends and I didn't keep my revision resources up to date. It didn't shock me when I continued to understand nothing in chemistry. My teacher would ask the class questions and receive blank stares. We complained to the science department but my school didn't have the resources to change teachers or support us further. I got my second chemistry test back. This time, it was even worse. I had achieved a U. By this point, I could feel my class losing all hope in this subject. Dismissals of, "This is gibberish, if Miss can't understand it, how am I meant to, and these questions are just unfair" filled the room. By the time my third chemistry test rolled around, I needed a turning point. I was at home, revisiting my flashcards, when it hit me for the first time that I couldn't keep blaming my teacher. In the grand scheme of my life, when anyone asked for my chemistry A-level grade, they wouldn't care who taught me or how unfair the questions were, they just see my grade. So if a good teacher is the light on a dark path, I needed to create my own torch. I emailed the head of chemistry that day. I requested a weekly meeting to go over anything I hadn't understood. I would stay behind after school if the head of chemistry would too, and go over every test question I got wrong until it clicked. She didn't reply to my email, so I went to see her in the staff room as a last chance glimpse of hope. She had to agree. Starting that Tuesday, I visited her after school. The difference this made was huge. In being proactive, I was essentially telling myself, week in, week out, that I would make this chemistry thing work. Whatever I didn't understand, I could and would understand with a bit more effort. This involved finding every online resource for A-level chemistry and inhaling it. I started reading about self-improvement and tools for sustained motivation through good habits. I researched the science of learning and radically changed my revision methods. My bedroom walls became a vision board of post-it notes of things I committed to understand. I began to change my mindset towards mistakes because I finally realized that getting something wrong meant that I could get it right in the future. In my next chemistry test, I got an A. I almost cried. My chemistry class went from 21 people to just 8 by year 13. The AS exam was too hard and most of us failed, meaning over half the class had to retake the year. Let me tell you, it would have been so much easier to give up chemistry at the start of year 12. Would I have saved myself some tears? Yes. Would I have struggled less? Sure. But there is nothing more satisfying than finally understanding something you know is difficult, even when you face setbacks in terms of lack of support or changes to specifications. Keep struggling. The moment it all clicks is one worth fighting for. I got an A in A-level chemistry. I am so proud of that grade. Imagine its results day. You're at school, surrounded by nervous peers and grinning teachers, with whom you avoid eye contact. Maybe your parents are with you. Maybe they're even more invested than you are. Pressure is in the air, the people, and in that envelope, you find your name and take it. When you hold that all-important envelope, what do you want to feel? A stinging regret deep in your gut that you could have worked harder, or a nervous peace? In that moment, you want to feel that you gave it your all. You didn't burn yourself out in the process, but you also didn't leave those grades to chance. You worked efficiently, not just harder but smarter. You can open those results knowing you did your best. That is enough. When we talk about getting started, maybe results day is the place to begin. Rather than looking at the textbooks or piles of notes, think of the overarching goal and how you want to feel on that day. You will never be able to guarantee grades, but you can guarantee how you approach them. You get to choose how hard you work and how to optimize your life to make learning feel fun. Results day is not a day at all. Results day is just a mindset, and it starts now. In these pages, we are going to focus on revision tactics to optimize your performance in our current school system, but it is important to recognize that grades are not everything. It took me so long to realize that school isn't just a tick box. Memorize a few pages, achieve a letter on a piece of paper, and happily move on. School is a stepping stone in your journey to self-growth. Deep, I know, the more you learn, the greater your world perspective and the better equipped you are to tackle the challenges you'll face in the future. For example, when you develop your essay skills, it goes beyond getting that A. It gives you the ability to craft good emails, express your thoughts, and view the media with a critical eye, such as examining the connotations of words they choose in headlines. When you study languages, you can one day go to that country and impress the locals when you know the word for recycling, because that's everyone's favorite conversation starter. Thanks GCSE French. School is just a stepping stone, grades or not. It is a place for you to learn and grow. The whole idea of school is to shape you and challenge you so you become a person with well-informed and fully fledged opinions. Dealing with exam stress is preparing you for the intensity of real-life work. Studying in team settings is teaching you to be an effective leader and to cooperate with other personalities. There is so much to gain from school that goes beyond letters on a piece of paper, and it took me entering the real world after 6th form to realize it. You see, you are only ever viewing life through the glasses of your own perspective, balanced on the tip of your nose and tinting the conclusions you draw. School gives you new lenses to see the world in all its wonder, color and complexity. The more lenses you possess, the more opportunities you have to clarify your viewpoint, and the more likely you are to change the world. I want to help you make the most of your learning opportunities so you can empower yourself to use this education for the better. Before we break down the idea of motivation, I'm going to take you back to me as a 14-year-old student. What a crazy age that was. I was juggling family issues, extreme mid-puberty insecurity, and the many dramas of social life, namely, mean girls at school, the invisible popularity ladder, friendship groups, and the increasing influence of social media, with its comparative nature. Oh, and then there were GCSEs. When teachers' salaries are indirectly tied to how well their students do, it is unsurprising that their pressure is shoved onto us. As the 2 years of GCSEs went on, I grew increasingly stressed about what felt like the be-all and end-all of my life. In the Easter holidays, I heard that friends had revised for 8 hours straight, when I'd only done 2. I came to associate time off studying with feeling guilty. The two main issues you can have with schoolwork are that you either care too much or you care too little. If you're too invested, you border on perfectionism and attach your self-worth firmly to the grades you get. If you don't care, you struggle to motivate yourself to achieve your potential. Understanding yourself as a student is important so that you can take the best actions for you. The former was my issue. As I went through the school system, I began to connect my sense of self to the grades I achieved. I became known for doing well. Let me tell you, there is nothing more crippling than a reputation, good or bad, with an expectation from peers, teachers, and ultimately myself to achieve good grades. I lost the fun of learning. If I got a B and not an A, I was disheartened. I used to dread peers asking, "How did you do on the test?" What I dreaded even more was when they squealed, "I scored higher than Jade." I beat myself up enough that I didn't need others doing it too. Reputation can be seen as a compliment. In a way, it was nice that people expected me to do well. However, at the same time, the pressure that came with being a high achiever heightened my stress levels. At parents' evening, I would hear teachers say, "Oh, of course she'll get an A," as their grades dropped in my lap without work. I felt added pressure from everyone around me that those grades needed to be easy. Equally, if you have been saddled with a reputation of being average, it's like someone dropped you on the rung of a ladder and told you that you will never ascend. They tilt your head downwards and away from higher goals and tell you to be happy here because some rungs just aren't for you. We all make judgments about how teachers feel about us, and if you feel like a teacher has no hope for you to achieve higher, you may fall into the trap of giving up, or settling for lower than what you believe you're capable of. I like to think of reputations as glass ceilings. When the expectations are too high, revision is unhealthily driven by fear that one bad grade will cause the ceiling above you to crumble. If people's expectations are too low, the ceiling limits your potential like a cage. Expectations from both yourself and others carry a heaviness which can lead you to give up. It can be hard to stay motivated when you feel like it's you against the world. The causes of a lack of academic motivation can be broken down to 3 main factors: lack of inspiration, conformity, and circumstance. For example, you might be uninspired and distracted, influenced by your peers who hate school, or so busy dealing with family issues that grades aren't a priority. All 3 are valid, but you can still find a way to work with these factors and find some motivation. Laziness. I like to call this a lack of inspiration. Us teenagers get a bad rep for being lazy and unmotivated compared to other generations, but I don't think this is our fault. We are in the age of distraction. We've been trained to tailor our lives to what we find immediately interesting. If we don't like something, we swipe. But when this translates to schoolwork, things get tough. Unfortunately, we can't just study the subjects we're interested in. There are other skills we have to learn, whether we like them or not. We don't absorb new concepts in 6 seconds. We can't swipe up when the test question gets hard. It is this combination of short retention spans, a desire for entertainment and a love of answers over questions that makes us lazy. Why struggle through a maths question when I can watch Netflix? And so I come back to the idea of lack of inspiration. Clearly, in the dry way you've been introduced to that algebra problem, or told to memorize 10 geography facts for next week. You've come to see learning as an avoidable chore, rather than something exciting. It is here we need to light that fire again. You need to start seeing why this difficult subject is so incredible and loved, as hard as that might feel. How those algebra problems are the basis of forecasting the weather, or how the geography case study happened to real people on the other side of the world, and you learning about is broadening your world perspective. These tasks are making you a better problem solver and solution finder. At school, we are never encouraged to look beyond the spec or to watch extra YouTube videos on a subject simply because it is interesting. If you hate a subject, dare to ask yourself, why? Is it just hard and that makes you feel insecure? Do your friends not like it? Or is it just that you don't know how it could be interesting? If the latter, maybe it's up to you to inspire yourself. It is easy to find motivation when you see why learning something is valuable. These are mental aspects of laziness, the barriers that stop you taking action. We'll be tackling the practical aspects of laziness and smashing procrastination with easily implementable systems as the book goes on. Conformity. Oh, this is a good one. We would never admit it, but half of what we like, what we do and what we believe is down to the people around us. If your mates wear a new style, you're more likely to wear it too. If your friendship group doesn't care about school, surprise, you probably won't care either. The idea of conformity is simple. We subconsciously copy others to benefit ourselves. For example, we copy friends for social gain. Human beings want to be liked or accepted because we are social animals, and this is beneficial to us. We copy people in positions of authority because they have influence and/or are experts. We trust their opinions and systems because we believe they will benefit us. The list goes on. Conformity is not inherently bad. However, when conforming to social norms because you want to fit in with your peers conflicts with your personal goals, this is an issue. Why should you care less about school to be cooler? Do school and friendship need to be mutually exclusive? Does not talking to your friend for a whole lesson mean you won't still be good friends? Probably not. It just means you can focus better. Sometimes you have to choose when to conform or not to optimize a certain benefit. It's okay if your friends have different goals. It says nothing about how well you get on with each other, and I would never suggest cutting off friendship for the sake of school. But what I am saying is, ask yourself, do I downplay how much I care about grades to fit in with my friends? If you answered yes, then firstly you're a legend for admitting it, and secondly, ask yourself if future you in 5 years would make the same choice. You can pursue doing well at school and be cool and have a good social life. Remember that. Circumstances. And lastly, quite possibly the most difficult source of demotivation to combat is your circumstances. Not everyone has flawless health, access to Nobel Prize winners for advice, and a private study space with a slide and ball pit. And even if you do, a ball pit? I'm jealous. We all have issues. Being a student is so tough. Seriously, the academic system pretends that exams are our whole lives, ignoring the nuance of everything that makes us, us. Whatever elements of your life you're juggling, be it mental health struggles, supporting your family, caring for others, navigating social life, or just the existential crises of growing up, I want you to know that this book sees that. This book recognizes you as a complex human. This book recognizes that the grade you get will not show everything behind the scenes, and that a pass grade for one person will merit the same congratulations of top grades for another. This book is an invitation to motivate yourself from within, taking into account everything else in your life. We all deserve to enter these exams with sharp pens blazing and brains bulging, because at the end of the day, the details of your circumstances weren't your choice, but the choice you do have is how you react to it. You've got this. Now that we've considered why you might not be motivated, let's think about how to light that fire. It's not that you wake up one day, see a bright light with a grade in it, and suddenly you're set for the rest of the year. Motivation either comes from intrinsic or extrinsic sources. Intrinsic motivation stems from a love of learning and the process itself. It's about finding enough joy in the act of studying that you don't mind spending another hour on it. It's being so fascinated by what you're studying that you're eager to learn more. It's looking forward to the feeling of entering an exam and knowing the answer to a question, or making yourself a vibey study playlist of lo-fi beats and looking forward to the cozy songs. Sometimes, I was motivated by how the topic we were learning in class was really cool and could be applied to other aspects of life. I loved how learning about plant cells in biology made me look at my houseplants in a whole new way, or how my business GCSE class helped me better understand my mum's job. Even though I didn't enjoy reviewing it, I loved that learning made me feel more informed on something useful. But sometimes it is the extrinsic sources of motivation that pull us along in the short term. These are external rewards, such as the grades themselves, verbal praise from parents, or winning a bet if you get a certain percentage. Extrinsic motivation is guided by outcomes. You don't need to care about learning as long as you get the result you want. Extrinsic motivation starts with identifying your long-term sources of motivation, such as a job or university, and understanding that all the effort you invest now will pay off for future you. Both forms of motivation are useful, but intrinsic motivation is usually more sustainable. If you can find a way to make the process more enjoyable, as opposed to only looking at the outcome, you will likely put more time and effort in, resulting in good grades anyway. Simon Sinek, an author and motivational speaker who wrote an influential book called Start With Why, once did a TED Talk about the success of the company Apple. He broke down how we view the external world and the stories we tell ourselves in setting goals. He concluded that it's not about the what, nor the how in goal setting, it's about the why, not what grade you want to get or how you're going to achieve it, but why you want to push for it. Maybe you love learning and the pursuit of better grades is part of a deeper pursuit of knowledge. Maybe you want to prove something to yourself or your family, to say, look, I struggled and I still achieved this insane thing I'm proud of. Or perhaps you have a dream university or career in mind, even if you don't know the specifics of what you want to do. I don't. We all know that better grades give us more options in life. Grades aren't everything, but they do help. Rather than motivating yourself around achieving a specific letter, focus on your larger why and whatever you need to fulfill it. Your why should be long-term. I like to think of goal setting as two-tiered. First, define the high-level long-term goal, then follow with smaller, more manageable blocks that serve that higher purpose. Here is an example of my why. I put it on a post-it note on my wall during my GCSEs. I am worthy of being successful at school because I want to prove to myself that I can achieve the grades I want, especially when I'm struggling. Knowing why you try will keep you going in your last hour of revision and motivate you to seek help when necessary. What is your why? Motivation is a feeling and thus not a reliable reason to study every day. Get clear on your why, and channel it to set up systems and habits which keep you going even when the feeling fades. Fixed versus growth mindset. A lot of research has been done on working out what makes the most successful students succeed. Interestingly, it is not natural intelligence or IQ, it is mindset and consistency. Perhaps the biggest takeaway in this whole section is that you define your work ethic. A fixed mindset is the belief that you are not naturally suited to something. For example, you're struggling with a maths problem and you say, I hate maths, I suck at it, I always have and I always will. But the second you attribute your performance to some innate ability, or lack of it, all room for improvement disappears. You curse yourself to this fixed place. A growth mindset, on the other hand, is the recognition that you will struggle and get things wrong, but you can always learn and do better. In the earlier example, instead of giving up and attributing the struggle to their bad maths skills, someone with a growth mindset would take on the challenge and push harder, perhaps by looking up videos of similar problems or asking a friend for help. It is a belief that you're not there yet, but you will be. The power of the word yet is enough to transform grades, how you feel about rejection and even life paths. I don't understand this maths problem yet, but I can and I will. I am not good at chemistry yet, but with enough work, I can be and I will be. I don't like English language yet, but I can find a reason to make it interesting. This mindset changed my academic life. I'd always catch myself moaning about how bad I was at subjects without really giving myself a chance to get better. If I believed there was no hope for me, how could I ever motivate myself to improve? During A-levels, I embraced the opportunity to get better. It inspired me to view failure more constructively and actively seek out my teachers for support. I even set up a weekly check-in with my maths teacher to go over questions I got wrong that week. It's more effort, sure, but the other option is sucking forever because you choose to, and that's a waste of all your potential. Even the great Albert Einstein said, "It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer." If you don't get something straight away, amazing, you're human. But all you need to do to be the next Albert Einstein is believe you'll get there eventually and have the grit to keep trying. To round this chapter off, think about this. Motivation is not a gift from the gods that blesses just a lucky few of us, nor is it a one-time thing that you achieve once and have forever. Motivation is a daily choice, one helped by changing your mindset, recognizing what is holding you back and then putting systems in place that help you stay disciplined when motivation fades. So remind me, why do you want to succeed again? You remember? Okay, then it's time to start. Put IT in practice. What is your reason for feeling unmotivated? Lack of inspiration, conformity or circumstance? Write down your why. Think about your intrinsic motivations and long-term extrinsic motivations. Put a note about them somewhere visible in your room. What do you normally tell yourself when you are struggling with something? Do you have a fixed mindset of thinking you are not naturally good at it? How can you make yourself believe that you're not there yet, but that you can be with more effort? From now on, every chapter will end with a short section from a student who recently went through the education system. Many of these authors are study tubers who are well known online for giving academic advice. We all learn differently, so it is important that this book encompasses a range of perspectives. If you're not already feeling motivated, just wait. Every page from here on out is infused with luck and good energy. You're welcome. Chapter 2, The Academic System. Before we get stuck into how to study and smash your exams, welcome to the most serious chapter of the lot. I want to give you something that I never had during my GCSEs, perspective. When you're in the pressured bubble of the education system, you never take a step back and realize that it is just that, a system. Everything from the exam boards to the long days of school, to cramming for exams and memorizing information. It's all an intricate web that goes beyond just you. The idea that exams are the best way to test young people is not fact, it is a decision that has been made. The existence of school rankings, memory-based questions and employing a standard metric to measure the answers is a choice. Now that I have finished my exams, I see the system for the first time. I see its purposes, its merits and, most importantly, its flaws. You do not have a choice in how you are tested. Whether the exams suit your style of learning or not, you will have to take them. What you do have a choice in is how you approach the system, how you use it to truly learn and how you can optimize the style of testing to give yourself the most options in life. Understanding what you're facing gives you the space to breathe and remind yourself that you have merit beyond the grade you are given. If you've ever wondered why the education system feels so stressful, I hope this chapter will show you that it's completely natural to feel that way. This is a reminder that though we must slay the exams to give ourselves options, we can meaningfully critique our system in a way which is empowering. We can see school as a game, and one which we are going to win. Welcome to a very brief history of the academic system, your place in it and what you can take away from it. A rapid-fire history of the English education system, or WHYIT. Is not weird to feel stressed. Every day when I went to school, I assumed that everything I was learning had been meaningfully designed for the benefit of every student's unique needs. I assumed that every test question had been carefully considered to give us all the best footing in life and to test all types of intelligence. Surely that's the job of the people in power, right? to ensure the next generation learns about themselves and the world in a way that empowers them to shape it. I imagined that modern-day schooling was founded on the notion of wanting the best for each individual so they could carve out the life of their dreams. I wish. While this is undoubtedly true for many of our incredible teachers who pour their hearts and souls into our education, we love you. The system needs work. One day, I was listening to Akimbo, one of my favorite podcasts by popular teacher, economist and marketing guru Seth Godin. In it, he dissected the history of the education system in the US and how its origins underscore many of the flaws in today's system, which fails to empower students to love learning. At its core, the education system went mainstream not because the government decided everyone deserved to learn, but indirectly for profit. Public education came with industrialization, which began at the end of the 1700s in the UK and saw people move away from agricultural work to spend long days in the new factories, often in unfavorable conditions. It was not surprising that some of these workers rebelled, rejecting the strict rules of the factory system that emphasized productivity over human rights. I mean, who wants to sit in one place all day and just do as they're told? Workers' lack of obedience was not ideal for production, and it was clear to the factory owners and ruling classes that a new system was needed to train future workers to better abide by rules and learn discipline. Enter the education system. Designed not around personal growth, critical thinking or enhancing one's world perspective, the first iterations of mainstream education for the masses were built around encouraging obedience, collective learning and rote memorization which could be applied to labor. Older and more able pupils were taught with standardized repetitive exercises. Did someone say reciting definitions? Schooling had a factory-like feel, with the batch production of students based on age group rather than ability or passions, specific metrics to define good and power dynamics that stripped divergent thinking. School was not training you to ask good questions, but rather answer the ones they wanted. Exams were introduced to suitably reassure outsiders that pupils were prepared for careers in the ever-growing administration and service industries. It was helpful to train students to memorize specific facts word for word. It was less useful for students to develop critical thinking, a tool which could be used to question the people at the top of the system. Though there have been many shifts in the academic system from that time, such as the introduction of a wide range of subjects, we still employ a lot of the same methods of learning. We are all familiar with the passive absorbing of carefully curated knowledge. I studied French for 5 years at school. I learned about the past tense, the present tense, the pluperfect. I even memorized a few passages and recited them in writing exams. But the obsession with theory instead of practice meant I came out of year 11 not even close to fluent. That's the thing, learning about something is not the same as learning something. In my gap year, I spent a month on an intensive language course in France. I lived with an amazing 60-year-old French woman in a stereotypically French apartment in Montpellier. Through fumbling over words like a babbling baby, I came out of France actually able to hold a conversation. I was both amazed and suddenly disheartened. Something about those 5 years learning French needed revision. Equally, I have friends who had no interest in reading long books, but could run like Usain Bolt or sew a dress from scratch in days. With increasingly more theory added to practical subjects and a reduction in coursework, my friends weren't able to excel in the subjects most important to them, or, worse still, were made to think that they were less valuable than the core academic subjects. The rote way we learn in school today was designed for an old world, the economic imperative of that time. Nowadays, the world is changing so quickly. Why isn't our education system changing equally as quickly to prepare us? So, everything you've ever learned was apparently only for an exam, but that still doesn't explain why it feels so stressful. At school, I remember thinking I was weak and incapable of handling large workloads. I assumed the system itself had to be optimal and fair, so if I struggled, it was all on me. Spoiler, learning should not feel stressful. It's not just you, it's a system of stress. The system is deeply flawed and the focus on ranking is often at the expense of what the school, its teachers and its pupils really need to thrive. Not everything can be measured by an exam or an Ofsted ranking, But sadly, to compare schools in the current system, it's been determined that you need a standardized metric. Welcome to standardized exams. I actually think the concept of exams is okay. Being tested is a great tool for learning. Exams, in isolation, are awesome. They show you where you're at with your abilities and tell you where you need to improve. Exams are not inherently stressful because pieces of paper are not stressful. What is stressful is the context of the system around it. By every standard of the school, performance needs to improve. The government has chosen the way in which they want this assessed. Annual exams, and our beloved teachers are the driving force of getting students to perform. Even when teachers buffer the pressure from schools, we still feel it. The way we are scored to a standard involves what Dr. Francis Maratos, a professor of emotion science, calls insecure competition. If we really wanted you as an individual to succeed, we would rank you against your own performance and progress. Instead, you are always ranked against others. Competition is not just with yourself and your abilities but with grade boundaries, peers and other schools. There are no negative repercussions to not getting the grade you want, like not being able to advance to the next level of studies or get the job you want. This is the issue with a standardized way of learning and grading. Having to focus on a percentage score and test of memory kills the root of learning, curiosity. It's why we often stop loving learning. When your results are tied to the performance of institutions, it's no surprise there are expectations placed on you. As someone who adores learning and how it enriches my world perspective, I really think that the fundamental system to support learning just needs a little work. A system that needs you to succeed for rankings on a wall is still, in my opinion, not a healthy system. The word school comes from the Greek word comma, which first meant leisure or free time. Ancient Greek philosophers believed that for true learning to occur, students needed to be given space and time to ponder ideas, exchange thoughts and sit with problems. If you don't understand something straight away, that shouldn't be frowned upon. You just probably haven't spent enough time turning over the problem or discussing it with friends. Without expectations to memorize a concept for a grade, you're incentivized to understand the concept for fun and even apply it to your own life. As a student doing my GCSEs, I didn't question the bigger picture, or wonder how it came to be like this. I woke up each day, dragged myself from bed to bus stop, brain half in social media. I went to each class. I didn't think about why I was learning what I was learning. I didn't wonder why teachers put so much pressure on us to perform or why every lesson from year 9 onwards mentioned exams. I didn't consider that there are other ways to value a person beyond mark schemes created by exam boards, and I definitely didn't realize that the school was just as scared as I was for results day. If you've never learned about the wider academic system, I hope this has empowered you to see stress as a product of a system that loves competition. Knowing this, you can take education into your own hands, see it as a game you can play and take the expectations placed on you lightly. It's not personal. Standardized metrics. Why aren't we measured on how fast we run, what kind of friend we are, how funny we are, how good we are at public speaking, how well we can knit? As Einstein says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. I do believe that every single person is flexible and capable of learning whatever they want, but it is useful to consider that certain methods of assessment suit certain people's skill sets more than others. For example, a system of theoretical exams with increasingly less coursework is best for people who can condense 2 or 3 years of study into one day of blurting down knowledge. How niche. However, this standard does not of course reflect your holistic potential. You have many and varied skills, talents and merits, and they are not all represented by how well you can recite some text or find the value of X under time-pressured conditions. The current education system does not value practical subjects in the same way it does academic ones, which is evident in the increase of theory-based grading. If you are less academic, it's unsurprising you hate school because it's hard to view your talents with the same value as those that are eagerly celebrated every day. But that is the system as it stands. So what can we do? Well, one good thing about such a standardized method of testing is that you can learn the system like a game. The more rigid it is, the easier it is to understand and optimize for. This knowledge is empowering, so let's work out how to smash the given standard, even while we remember that it is not all there is. If the system wants to give you stress, we're going to throw mindfulness and evidence-based revision techniques back at them like highlighted artillery. Over the next few chapters, we are going to dig into the depths of how to succeed. If you're not thrilled by the thought of exams, you don't have to lie and say you love them. Instead, notice how you do feel towards them. Do you feel angry? Great. Because you can decide from here on out that you're going to channel that anger into efficiency, to beat the exam boards at their own game. Do you feel unmotivated because exams don't suit you? Understandable and valid. Recognize that you have incredible talents beyond the system and that learning to get through exams in the easiest way possible is a gift to your future self. Do you feel scared? Awesome, I did too. Fear is so natural in the lead up to exams because it comes from uncertainty. You'll never know all the questions you'll be asked, but you can become fluent in the exotic tongue of exam technique. This book is going to prep you for those exams until you're strutting into the hall like you invented GCSEs. So, WHYTRY, the system isn't perfect. You can probably see that now. The reasons we get stressed are not because we're weak or incapable, how dare they? But because the system is designed for us to compete around standards that may not suit every learner. But if you know the system is flawed, why motivate yourself to learn? There are so many reasons why it's important to take learning into your own hands as a teenager. Here are my top 5 reasons why I worked hard, bloody hard, to achieve what I did at GCSE and A-level, and why you should too. School is what you make of it. The more you put in, the more you get out. One of the most empowering parts of the academic system is knowing that you can control how you approach it. You can experiment and test out study routines without having to worry about not being paid by an employer. If you get it wrong to start with, no one is going to fire you. You can just have another go. You also have time to ask questions and get curious beyond the textbook. You can use the syllabus as a starting point to find subjects you're passionate about. As a teenager, your sole, full-time job is studying, or, put another way, your whole job is learning about the world through the frameworks given to you. Seize it, go beyond, learn more and motivate yourself to see how special this time of your life is. Whenever I speak to adults, they wish they had more free time to just learn. Top tip: go and watch TED Talks related to the class topics and discuss them with your friends. Explore YouTube videos and podcasts to learn about alternative opinions to what you're being taught. What you're taught in the specification is an incredible taster of everything that subject has to offer. If you find something interesting, I dare you to go beyond. Even if extra reading doesn't instantly get you a better grade, it comes back to the idea of intrinsic motivation discussed in Chapter 1. The more you find joy in the process of learning, and the more you can view it as useful to your own interests, the more likely you are to organically succeed. Options. At the end of the day, grades just give you options. If you have no idea what you want to do with your life, trying hard at school is one way to broaden your horizons. The universities you can apply to, the subjects you can study, the job you can get, all of it is indirectly impacted by that sheet of paper at the end of exams. It is a radical act of self-love and self-compassion to care about your education, because everything you learn will indirectly help future you. Discipline and hard work. Ah yes, if this isn't the older generation's favorite, dare I say it, though, they have a point. Hard work is, as the name suggests, hard, but I learned so many incredible habits in my secondary school life. I taught myself how to adopt a routine and stick to it. I learned how to set a goal and do everything possible to achieve it. For example, I believed wholeheartedly that I could and would achieve an A in A-level chemistry if I worked hard and smart enough. If I created the right action plan, optimized my teachers and resources, I was capable of success. In my life beyond school, this mindset has proven invaluable. When it came to creating business projects, working in internships or writing university assignments, I had already learned how to create ambitious goals and work for them. The world is so full of opportunity if you choose to see it that way. The world also has pressing, complex problems that require a hard-working mindset. If you can teach yourself how to solve academic problems you don't enjoy, you'll be better equipped to tackle all the unpleasant problems in your later life. You are a tiny agent in a massive system, but you have so much power to create change. Learning to strive for big goals through overcoming smaller problems will equip you to view the world as malleable. The reinforcing feedback loop of success. According to positive psychology, success breeds success, which breeds more success. School is an opportunity for you to define what success means to you and optimize for it. What are you telling yourself? Are you the student who scraped a pass, or the student who smashed a pass and is capable of achieving whatever they want in life? You passed, and you are one step closer to a lifetime of your chosen success. For me, working hard to achieve the GCSEs I wanted was such a confidence boost. It was a reminder that anything I wanted to do in life was within reach if only I developed the right strategies. Feeling successful makes you reach for further success, however you define it. The academic system is a game, and you came to win. As I have already mentioned, the system is not designed for each individual person. Instead, it's a very specific game with very specific rules, and therefore you can find a formula to win. Thinking of exams as a game you play against an arbitrary system takes the pressure out of them. Whether the style of the academic system suits you or not, you can learn how to strategize to get the best out of it. Later life is going to be full of other systems you have to navigate, and some of those will suit you and some won't. If you can learn how to beat this system as a teenager, then you'll be well prepared for other challenges in life. You're not weird for feeling stressed by all the hoops of exams and coursework and constant assessment you have to jump through. There's a long way to go to developing student-specific growth, learning and critical thinking without the terrifying pressure associated with exam grades. But for now, this is where we are. The game will teach you so many life lessons, if only you choose to play and win. Advice from Viola Helen. If you had asked me at 16 where I saw myself at 24, I would probably have told you that I would be a graduate from a top university, living in central London, with a fancy corporate job. The reality, far from it. I would never have believed you if you told me that, despite taking a gap year both before and after university to travel, after graduating from the University of Oxford, I would spontaneously move to Portugal entirely by myself, that I would consciously choose to move to a country where I did not know the language, where I did not have a job lined up, and where I did not know anyone. But I did. Traveling around the world and living abroad has altered my perspective on the education system. In the UK, there is incredible pressure to excel academically because society constantly emphasizes that good grades equals getting into a good university equals getting a better, higher paid job. I will not deny that having a strong academic background is certainly beneficial and will open doors to many opportunities. However, with this academic pressure, there is also a huge rush to find a job straight out of university and to work your way up the corporate ladder as soon as possible in order to seem successful. Societal expectations give students no room to even question whether they actually want to do the jobs they are so desperately applying for. And what is the rush? I have slowly realized that we are going to be working for the next 40 years of our lives. Surely we are allowed to take some time to learn, grow and develop before plunging headfirst into a job we do not even want. Whilst this may very well be easy for me to say as an Oxford graduate, I promise you that there is so much more to life than attaining top grades in order to get a particular type of job. Though we should certainly work as hard as we can whilst at school, because being academically strong provides a safety net when entering the real world, we should not forget that grades do not define us and do not dictate our future. There are numerous jobs and professions out there requiring skills which can be learned independently from traditional education settings and through real-life experiences. Here in Portugal, I do not feel the same pressure to have my life figured out by X age. I am currently open to everything life has to offer. I am taking time to develop the skills I am interested in. I am dedicating time to learning Portuguese, and I am exploring various different career options through networking and speaking to professionals. I am learning, exploring and evolving, and, despite feeling extremely conflicted about going against societal expectations, I know that this is the right decision for me. Remember, there is more to life than the academic system. While you're in it, the best thing you can do is your utmost best. It's enough. Chapter 3: How We Learn. I can definitely say that the first time an end of chapter test was slapped on my desk in year 7, I had never thought about how we actually learned. Information would pass from textbook to class notes, to my lazy eyes as I reread everything and hoped it would magically go in so I could pass my tests. I heard myths that if I slept with a textbook under my pillow, I would wake up a genius. I heard that if I listened to Spanish audio recordings every night, I would wake up fluent. I wish revision was a fingers crossed guessing game. It wasn't until I dug into the basics of human memory that I began to understand how we can optimize revision. Rather than spending more hours at the desk, I needed to change the techniques I was using to begin with. Rather than working harder at every study session, I needed to be strategic about when I was revising and how often. My long study sessions were made miserable by their lack of success in tests. I needed to transform my revision into something more effective. How do we actually learn? From reading into evidence-based revision techniques, I created a handy framework called SAD, pronounced SAD like you're prolonging the inside until you're happy, where each letter stands for a way to make my learning more successful based on science. Now every time I come to study, I mentally go through the SAD checklist and ask myself if what I am doing fulfills these requirements. This framework is a way to make sure your revision works. Everything I'm about to share with you is an easily digestible version of scientifically backed studies about human cognition. This chapter will cover the science behind learning, dubbed the principles of learning, and position them in the context of different revision techniques you're familiar with. It will equip you with a simple framework to judge every piece of revision you do from here on out, and this knowledge completely changed my revision life. If you remember one thing from this book, make it this framework. Get ready. You're going to come out of this chapter turning miserable and sad revision into time-effective SAD revision, which really works. SAD, spaced repetition. So there's a guy called Hermann Ebbinghaus, a pretty cool guy. Some call him the father of memory because he was the first person to carry out experiments about human retention. He sat in a room alone and forced himself to memorize thousands of nonsense words, measuring his ability to recall these words over time. As I said, a cool guy, with lots of free time. He discovered the forgetting curve, which paved the way for how we think about memory retention. The graph is shown below. The forgetting curve. As you can see, your memory starts strong. You revise a concept, you understand it, and you can readily recall the information. For example, I tell you the name of my dog, Willow. It's right there in your mind as you tell her to sit and fetch. You shake Willow's paw and decide she is, in fact, very cute. But memory decays exponentially. Over just 7 days of not revising it, you can't recall the concept anymore. You come back to see my dog and you just can't remember her name. You desperately ask her to fetch a half-chewed toy and she stares at you blankly. Who? Me. This is actually quite sad. I can vividly remember getting the odd burst of motivation to spend the day revising. I would get all my notes, feel like a revision queen for putting in the hours, and leave my session confident in my knowledge. But that session would be a one-off. I didn't have the systems in place to review those concepts again later in the week. Before I knew it, that day spent revising was for nothing. I forgot almost all of it after 2 weeks. So how can you improve this curve? We don't want to learn something and watch our knowledge slip away faster than students leaving school when the bell rings. Thankfully, there is a solution. Maybe you've heard of spaced repetition. It's a bit of a buzzword in the world of productivity social media. I was first introduced to it by my good friend and YouTuber Audiobook. The idea is that you review information again, multiple times, at set intervals from first learning it. Have a look at the new graph below. Every time you review the information, you reset your memory back to 100%. The idea is that you catch your memory just as you're about to forget what you learned. The beauty of spaced repetition is that the more you review a concept, the longer the gap you can leave before reviewing it again. Eventually, the information becomes so ingrained in your long-term memory that you can review it once a month, or once every few months. The secret is not cramming for 10 hours once in a while. It's not about working harder at all. It's about working smarter, for less time, but consistently. Reviewing concepts for 5 minutes every day with spaced repetition is the scientifically backed secret to good grades. There are different ways to create systems of accountability for spaced repetition. For example, you can create a spreadsheet with all your topics and input the date of when you last studied it. You can then calculate the next best time for review based on the forgetting curve, such as going over your flashcards tomorrow, in 3 days and then after a week. In the next chapter, I will also discuss flashcard apps which have inbuilt spaced repetition functions to help you optimize human learning. However you end up revising, you need to use spaced repetition. It's not about revising for longer, just more frequently. Welcome to your first snippet of understanding how you learn. Spaced repetition is the first step in turning SAD revision to SAD revision. SAD, active recall. Right, friends, let's go on another deep dive. There's another interesting guy called Stephen Kosslyn, a prominent psychologist and neuroscientist. He split up human learning into 2 overarching maxims: think it through and make and use associations. Both of these maxims capture principles of the science of learning that explain why certain revision techniques do, and don't, work. So what does it mean to think it through? The idea is that the more you are forced to think deeply about an idea, the more you remember it. Turning over a concept in your head strengthens the synaptic connections in your brain, which are the gaps between neurons and allow the transfer of information in the brain. Continuously revisiting thoughts strengthens the neural pathways to accessing that information. Just like being forced to recall facts is more beneficial than passively reading them on a page. The principle of think it through leads us to the A in SAD revision, active recall. We don't like to think. Even when we revise, we would prefer to reread our notes, highlight words in a textbook or annotate text rather than stare at a blank page and recite our existing knowledge. We look for shortcuts. To this day, even though I understand the power of active testing, I find myself rereading articles and books rather than forcing myself to see what I can recall first. Without actively recalling information, you don't actually know what you don't know. Imagine you're reading a textbook. There is a fully labeled diagram in front of you. Definitions are neatly explained on the page. You even have step-by-step explanations of scientific processes or historical events. Everything you are reading makes sense. But if you understand the information and find yourself nodding along, you are lulling yourself into believing you know the information, which is not the same as simply understanding it. If you've ever done a biology exam, you'll know that it is one thing to confidently understand a biological process but another to recall every step, with every keyword, without a single prompt. And this is exactly what the mark scheme requires of you. When you are passive, it is easy, but you reveal nothing to yourself. When you are active, it is uncomfortable, challenging and requires mental effort, which is why it is the most effective use of your time. Let's look at an example of 2 sets of flashcards. The first one has a labeled diagram of a plant cell. You look over the diagram and check if you know the details. Cell wall? Yep, makes sense. Looks like a wall. Nucleus? Of course, easy. A black dot. Now here is more of an active recall diagram. What type of cell is this? What is the cell wall made out of? Suddenly, with hardly any prompts, your brain has to actively recall the labels of the diagram. This truly tests whether or not you know them. The mini questions force you to recall your knowledge and engage with the flashcard. You can put the answers on the back or double-check your notes to see if you were right. Active recall goes against human nature, as we always want to find the path of least resistance with revision. Remember, the harder the revision feels, the more effective it probably is. Get that brain working. Before we move on, a quick question for you. Can you remember what the S stands for in SAD revision? Have a think. 2 words, one beginning with S, the other with R. Can you see why me asking is demonstrating your use of this principle? If you can't remember, flick back now. I'll be asking you again soon. SAD, associations, the second of Kosslyn's maxims, that he calls make and use associations, fits into active recall but deserves its own mention. Why is this important? Information does not sit in your brain in isolation. You don't have a section of the brain reserved for historical dates, apart from maths equations or a bunch of neurons labeled in organic chemistry. Instead, everything you've ever learned is intertwined, one big ingenious mess of knowledge. Some people think that learning something distinctly different from what you already know will save you getting confused, when in reality, a powerful principle of revision techniques is connecting what you're learning to existing knowledge, making associations and using them. I'm going to demonstrate this in the least professional revision way. You've been invited as a +1 to a party, drink in hand. You go over to meet the host. You smile at them, introduce yourself, shake their hand, and then get ready to ask the make or break question, "What's your name?" But you're immediately mentally cursing yourself, because the second you ask this, you've entered an invisible contract to try your very best to remember that person's name, whether it's common or completely new to you. But you're horrible at remembering names. You can already feel yourself repeating it in your head. Charlotte, 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 Charlotte. How hard can it be to remember the name Charlotte? Before you know it, you're enjoying the social event and no longer engaging in your mental relay of their name. You're swayed into the crowds, with new names to recall and new conversations to fill your mind. The party ends. You call out to thank the host and you can't remember her name for the life of you. Was it Catherine or Lucy? She looks like a Lucy, but you're sure it started with a C. And then you're fumbling awkwardly, aware that she just let you into her house and you didn't even have the decency to remember her name. If you had applied the second day in SARD revision, you wouldn't have this issue. Let's reverse. This girl reveals her name is Charlotte. You have a couple of seconds in your mind to think about what this name means to you. Do you know any Charlottes? Is there a celebrity with this name? If so, you must find a way to connect this new person with your existing idea of the name. For example, imagine your neighbor Charlotte's face on top of the face of this girl you just met. Make yourself think about the fact that the Charlotte who lives next door has different colored hair to this new Charlotte. Maybe you're thinking of the British royal princess Charlotte, and that though this new woman is not a royal princess, you notice she carries herself with elegance, or that she has a good enough vocabulary to remind you of famous author Charlotte Bronte. Whatever it is, make an association. It sounds silly, but you are training your brain in those 2 seconds to create a rich retrieval cue to this person's name. You are giving them a space in your head by attaching them to your existing knowledge. At the end of the party, you go to thank the host. Her name doesn't come to you immediately, but all of a sudden you're thinking about how she doesn't look like a royal princess, or that her hair color is different to your neighbor. The name returns to you. The association was a success. Social awkwardness helpfully avoided. But what if her name wasn't Charlotte but one you've never heard before? Suddenly you're panicked that there are no existing associations to the name. There is no hope your memory will succeed. But the magic of associations is that they can be creative and unique to you. I'll share with you a story of a girl I met at university. She is from Kosovo and has a beautiful name that I struggled so hard to remember. My fault, not hers. Ujiza, pronounced Oyezar. I don't know about you, but I don't know many Ujizas. I saw her every day in the hallway and, no matter what, couldn't link her name to anything I could remember. Which is why you need to create your own associations. In my head, I broke her name down into the words you, yay and star. I played a 10-second mental game with myself where I imagined this girl pointing at me, saying you, cheering yay, and then calling me a star. Quite an ego boost, I know. This vision of her pointing, cheering and saying star allowed me to remember the sequence you yay star, which was enough to jog my memory of her name Oyezar, Ujiza, and now her name is easy. What does this tangent show you? Though this example isn't routed in studying for an exam, it proves that memory requires a base. You can't expect to learn a brand new concept with no foundational knowledge to root it. Foundational material is actually the backbone of additional information because it allows you to have an organized mental structure over time. But how do you apply this to revision? Let's take a historical fact you need to learn for a test about the Second World War. You need to remember key dates in a timeline, but the long list of numbers and months in front of you feels completely overwhelming. For example, the Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939. How can you remember this? Start thinking about what this day in September means to you. It can be anything. Is it usually cold in your country? Are the leaves starting to fall in autumn? I associate 1 September with the start of the academic year at school. Whatever it is, find a way to link this to the idea of the Second World War. Imagine autumn leaves falling when people heard the news or kids on their way to school. This mental image that you naturally associate with the date will help jog your memory in an intuitive way. To remember the year 1939, look for any association you have to this number. Do you know anyone who is 39 years old? Do you deeply know any key dates in history around this time that will allow you to connect the start of the Second World War to this other event? Can you notice that 1939 has 2 9s in it, which could represent 2 world wars? Whatever silly association you make, it will turn facts into a long-term element of memory through linking to what you definitely do know. If you can find a way to make your revision connected, meaningful and built upon past knowledge, you will create rich retrieval cues to prompt you, and this is where long-term knowledge starts. So, to recap, our SAD revision is starting to look a bit more spaced, active and associated. Hey, we're getting there. SAD. Desirable difficulty. As mentioned earlier, we love to go for shortcuts. We love to feel like we're doing hard work without actually thinking too hard, which is why we need to check that our revision is desirably difficult. If you hate a subject, you probably just find it hard. Flashback to A-level chemistry again. Oh, I was not a fan of drawing molecules and reciting lab practicals. It was hard and, hence, not fun, at least, for a long time. But you know what was fun? Reviewing English literature notes. I found it interesting and easy to process, so I would find myself revising it more than I needed to because it made me feel productive without much commitment. Meanwhile, I would put off chemistry work, rather than attacking it head-on. I would hide from it and move the undone practice papers through my to-do lists like I was shuffling cards. Desirable difficulty is about realizing when something is hard and choosing to do it anyway. The last thing we want to do is torture ourselves in our free time with subjects we find hard, but half the pain of revision is in choosing to start. SAD revision asks you to know your academic pain points and, rather than ignoring them, attack them, with bows and arrows and guns and flamethrowers and an army of flashcards. This is how you will grow. However, desirable difficulty is not just about choosing to revise the hard subjects, but asking yourself during your revision if you're actually having to think, more than simply doing active recall. Question how hard you're finding it. If it's easy, amazing, do the harder stuff. Maybe you're ready to try a past paper, apply your knowledge to practice questions or to explain these concepts to a friend. Invite yourself to seek the challenge. Getting better is not about repeating what you confidently know. Put IT in practice, so that you have it. Here are 4 ways to really connect with the way we learn and that we can use every time we revise. Are we doing SAD, unhelpful revision, or are we doing SAD revision? S. Are you repeating this revision activity at spaced intervals, or is this a one-off? A. Are you revising actively? Are you thinking, or are you just reading? A. Are you associating this new information to knowledge you already have? How can you make links? D. Is this activity desirably difficult? Can you make it more challenging, if necessary? Advice from Ali Abdul. After studying medicine at University of Cambridge, Ali is both a junior doctor and YouTuber discussing all things productivity, studying, tech and living a happy life. He is also the king of study tips, so listen up. I really struggled through my first year of medical school. I was taking copious notes, highlighting my lecture notes, and spending hours reading my textbooks. I'd feel like I understood something, but within a few days, I'd forget everything and have to start from scratch. Then, in my second year, I discovered the world of evidence-based study techniques. Turns out researchers have been studying this for decades, with hundreds of experiments done on, mostly, students to figure out what strategies work best for understanding and remembering. One of the most mind-blowing insights was that learning stuff isn't about putting things into our brain, it's about getting stuff out of our brain. In other words, rereading and summarizing information in an attempt to force it into our brain isn't going to work. Instead, if we read it once and then test ourselves repeatedly, we're more likely to remember. It's the act of retrieving information from our brain that strengthens the connection to it. When I discovered this, I reoriented my study and revision strategies around testing myself. The more I tested myself, the more I remembered. It also made studying much more fun. I made a spreadsheet with a list of topics, and I'd color them in red, yellow and green, depending on how well I knew the topic. I'd look forward to testing myself on each topic to turn the topic green. This gamification of studying, and testing in particular, made it more motivating and enjoyable. Other than testing myself more, another game-changing innovation was understanding spaced repetition. I used to think I was an idiot if I read something and then forgot it a few days later, but that's literally how our memory is supposed to work. Using spaced repetition, we can interrupt the forgetting curve, as you'll have learned about in this chapter, and so we're more likely to remember things. Once I discovered the power of these evidence-based study techniques, I ended up doing better in my exams, while working and stressing a lot less. Because of all this copious free time, I ended up starting my YouTube channel while I was in medical school. That decision has completely changed my life, and is how I'm friends with Jade. But it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't given these novel techniques a shot. If you'd like to read more on this, I've listed the full studies on the bibliography page at. We're given textbooks. We're even taught each lesson in that textbook. But perhaps the most essential process, that of distilling, learning and memorizing the content, is left up to you. Let me tell you, it took me a long time to realize that highlighting my biology textbook wasn't going to get me an A. As I say, I'm no expert. But from all the research I've done on what makes revision effective, as well as what worked for me, I hope these techniques help optimize your time. Before reading this chapter, I highly recommend going back and reading Chapter 3 so you are comfortable with the idea of SARD study techniques. The SARD framework gives you a base to understand why these revision techniques are so effective. Ditch aesthetics. I know, I'm sorry. But you have permission to keep your pastel highlighters. Wow, those notes are beautiful, Jade, my friend said, pointing to the class notes I'd just spent the day copying up. She pointed to the title, written once in pastel highlighter and lovingly written over again in fine line biro. The classic mark of an aesthetic Year 9 queen. Thank you, I responded, smiling as I placed the sheet into my well-organized ring binder. By the time she asked, "Can I see your flashcards?" I was already handing them to her. Each flashcard was, as my oh-so-modest self believed, beautiful. Tiny curled handwriting in full sentences. Every word had been labored over, each flick of the pen in time to the pop music I was probably singing along to at the time. My friend turned each one over in her hands to be met with more pretty squiggles and long lines. The block text was perfectly arranged. The flashcard suddenly froze in her hand. She looked up at me. "Isn't this exactly the same thing you wrote in class?" I nodded. "Sure, I mean, I changed the odd thing." I took them back from her. "But it's so much easier to revise from flashcards. It's way more effective for me when it looks pretty." She looked down at the thick block of text, no doubt thinking this was nothing better than a pretty version of the textbook. What I didn't tell her was that though I felt great pride in my gorgeous notes, the thought of reading so much text filled me with dread. I didn't understand some of the topics and knew that these cards wouldn't change that. I could not recite a single card back to you from memory. After all, I had copied up sentences line for line. That was me early in secondary school. Back then, though, tests were much simpler, so it didn't matter if my revision methods were effective or not. Turns out, Aesthetics are not scientifically backed to improve grades. Unfortunately, I genuinely did not understand why flashcards were useful. I didn't know why directly copying my class notes onto a new piece of card was helpful. It turns out that I was missing the very point of flashcards. Instead of testing myself, summarizing information and making my life easier, I was rereading diluted content which I may as well have read from a textbook, and saved myself a lot of time. I have a deep respect for highlighters, especially pastel ones. But when it comes to how to revise, they aren't going to improve your grade. This chapter will show you 10 scientifically backed SARD revision methods which are less pretty but much more functional. If pretty notes truly make you happy, keep making them. But for the sake of your exams, do the following too. As I went through school, I realized that doing well in an exam requires 3 main stages of studying. Whenever you come to revise, ask yourself which of the 3 stages below it fits into. Understand, learn, apply. Without an initial grasp of the concepts, there is no point memorizing the right words to string together in an exam question. The process of understanding begins in the classroom. It continues with reading study guides, watching videos, asking your teacher and peers for help, and wrestling with the content until you reach that aha moment. It's not worth embarking on the memory-based revision techniques until you confidently understand the topic at hand. You need to be able to not only recall information but use it in new scenarios, so leverage the people and resources you have for that subject until you get it. One of my biggest pieces of advice is to use class time to just listen. During my A-levels, I would skim over the lesson content in the textbook beforehand to familiarize myself with key terms. For the rest of that hour, I just listened, asked questions and tried to grasp the concept. It's tempting to only copy up notes during class but make your priority understanding, such as adding extra comments in your notebook to explain things in a way which makes sense for future you. It's much easier to teach yourself something at home when you know you've understood it before. The second step is learning. It is one thing to finally understand something. It is another to be able to recall and retrieve specific information from the concept when prompted. When we read a textbook of concepts, we find ourselves nodding our head in agreement. The textbook makes sense. In fact, it seems easy, and yet suddenly, turning to an exam question on that very topic reveals the horrifying conclusion that you do not, in fact, know this information. Most people skip from the I understand and go straight to the let's apply this in an exam stage. Memorize, test yourself on, and learn the content. The third step is application. This is where you test yourself. Pick up practice test papers and attempt to prove your knowledge in the way exams will reward you for. Practice papers elevate you from knowing the information to using it in the very specific way that exam boards want. In this chapter, we are going to cover 10 revision techniques which are tried and tested to help you thrive in the exams. Some of them require more time, others need a bit of creativity. But all of them work. They will take you through learning the information to applying it in the way you are going to need to do in your exams and assessments. It's important to actually try out these revision techniques to find out which ones work best for you. For each one that you master, you're adding to your study vocabulary. You're learning the language of revision so that by the time exam season hits, you're fluent. All of these techniques hinge on creating SARD revision. As discussed in Chapter 3, can you remember the elements of SARD? Take a second to look away from the page and remind yourself. The process of actively recalling it is beneficial to long-term retention. Here's a recap. Spaced repetition is all about revisiting the same information at specific points in time to combat the forgetting curve of human memory. Recall information many times at the start and progressively less often as it enters your long-term memory. Active recall means generating knowledge from your brain, even if it's hard. Instead of looking at the information on my flashcard, I write a question to force myself to produce the information myself. Association means building on your prior knowledge. These techniques invite you to make connections between different topics to give you rich retrieval cues for the information. Desirable difficulty means these techniques aren't going to be easy. Passive revision gives you a break. It's too easy and so you learn less. Instead, if you test yourself and wrestle with your knowledge in ways which reveal your difficulties, you will ultimately learn the content in a much more meaningful way. The harder your revision is, the easier the exams will be. Future you is already thanking you. Before jumping into memorizing content, here is a top tip to guide your revision. Make sure you're learning the right information. Print off the specification for your syllabus, which can be found on the exam board's website. It has a long list of points from the people who write the exam papers and tells you what you need to know. For example, it might tell you that students should know how to round numbers to an appropriate degree of accuracy in GCSE maths. The specification becomes a checklist of items to guide your revision. If you're working through the spec, you can walk into that exam hall confident that you've covered all the foundations. Use your textbook, class notes, teacher's notes and the specification to condense the most essential information that you'll need for that exam. Spectacular job, team. Secondly, take a moment to diagnose your subjects and what they demand of you. This is one of the best things I do to guide my revision. Subjects like English literature are essay-based, so they require different revision methods to subjects like science, which require you to apply your knowledge to short answer questions. With some subjects, you can start anywhere. For example, geography allows you to study ideas, to some extent, in isolation, jumping across the map or from Oxbow Lake to volcanoes. However, some subjects build upon themselves such that you can't move on to the next concept before you have a solid understanding of the last. This is how maths works. If you're not confident in basic algebra, you'll struggle to do harder combined questions. All of the revision techniques below are useful, but it's up to you to work out what your subjects require of you and use these techniques to help you. Do you need to memorize facts? Do you need to solve problems? Do you need to write essays? Get clear on how you will be marked and how your subject works. As an example, let's diagnose GCSE English literature. What are the different parts that make up this subject, and what do they require you to do for revision? Here are some examples. Requirement action. Be confident analyzing and using different literary devices, e.g. metaphors. Alliteration 1. Memorize the names of enough literary devices and practice identifying them. 2. Practice writing pieces and including literary devices. Know the conventions of different forms of text, e.g. letter, poem, short story. 1. Memorize conventions. 2. Practice writing pieces using conventions. 3. Practice analyzing texts of each form. Know quotes from the set text and use them effectively to infer meaning. 1. Memorize quotes. 2. Practice analyzing these quotes in an essay. You can similarly diagnose individual topics, chapters or exam papers within a subject to identify what you need to be able to do, and how you can tackle it. This chapter will give you techniques to help bridge the gap in an effective way. We'll come back to this diagnosis at the end and see how we should study. Diagnosis done, specification printed, tentative smile on. Let's go learn. Learning methods. 1. Flashcards. One of the most common and the most commonly abused revision techniques. If you think flashcards are a way to make a long-form revision version of your class notes, I'm here to tell you that someone lied to you. Flashcards should be 3 things: short, meaningful and connected. Short, as in, short, as in, a few words on one flashcard. No long sentences, no overkill explanation, nothing that you can merely copy from your notes. Flashcards are about making your life easy by condensing content into its bare bones. Think, how few words can you use to get your point across? The idea is that you already understand the concept, so you don't need to write a dissertation on a card. Instead, make it brief but meaningful. You should be able to fill in the blanks from the few words you've given yourself. Flashcards are all about active engagement. If you're not filling in the blanks or explaining the concept to yourself using the prompts, you should be writing questions. On one side of the flashcard, ask yourself a specific, directed question. For example, which is bigger and why, the phloem or the xylem? This forces you to produce the basic answer but also to expand. Flip over the card, check whether or not you got it right. Note down how you fared and then use specific spaced repetition methods to make sure you come back to this card again soon if you did poorly. Flashcard language. Oh, this is fun. Without trying to, I developed my own flashcard language. Seeing words and parroting them back to yourself is great, but you can make revision even more active by making yourself fill in the blanks. My flashcard language was made of various intuitive symbols. It made the process of writing cards more active, and was especially great when I was too lazy to write more. This is a way to force your brain to say aloud what the symbols mean. The more active recall, the better. Increases equals, decreases equals, greater than or less than equals less than or greater than, goes to equals at, therefore equals, because equals. Shorten book character names by using symbols or letters, for example, Othello equals O. Shorten country or case study names with symbols or letters, for example, India equals in. For example, I would use the flashcard, on the previous page, to fill in what each letter stands for in my head. This flashcard is a demonstration of DNA base pairings. I would fill in that A is adenosine and links with thymine, T, with 2 hydrogen bonds. If I wanted to make this even harder, I could leave a blank space where the number of hydrogen bonds is to force myself to recall this too. For this flashcard, when I came to revise, I would cover up the text and just look at the prompt images to test myself on the reaction mechanisms. For example, I would look at the sun image and ask what it represents when thinking about ATP synthesis reactions. The sun makes me think of a process called photosynthesis which involves sunlight, which thus prompts my knowledge of phosphorylation. This process is especially helpful if you are a visual learner. This flashcard has prompt questions to use active recall and features the answers on the back. This flashcard uses condensed symbols for the word because and has blank spaces for me to fill in my knowledge. This turns the sentences into active recall prompts. The beauty of flashcards is that they are straightforward to make and revise from. The downside is the discipline required to make them. I cannot recommend this enough. Make flashcards as you go. Get into the robust habit of making a flashcard for every meaningful topic you cover as you go. We all love pushing tasks to the end of the year, but you will have enough on your plate when exams hit to be recondensing old information. Do future you a favor and learn to make useful flashcards from day one. If you're reading this and exams are coming up, do not fret. There is still time. Dedicate time to the subjects you struggle with most first to get the biggest benefit out of flashcards. You can make flashcards by hand or online using simple flashcard apps like Anki and Quizlet. These have the added benefit of inbuilt spaced repetition. After testing yourself on your knowledge, the app sorts the flashcard into different packs for revision. If you always get a concept right, you will not have to revisit that flashcard for a longer period. Equally, if you always forget the date that Henry VIII died, the app will make sure you're answering it every day until you know it. However, you have to find what works best for you. If flashcard apps get you distracted, ditch them. If you always lose handwritten flashcards, consider using online cloud-based methods. More than anything, practice makes perfect with flashcards, and their benefits are long-lasting. Remember, the more effort you put into simplifying information now, the easier life will be when you come to revise. Here are some examples of how I designed flashcards. Front of flashcard, back of flashcard, front of flashcard, back of flashcard. For this flashcard, I would hide the text with my hand and test myself on each step using the images. It's important to find a method that works for you, but don't be fooled by the lure of aesthetics. As long as it's concise, meaningful and smart, it'll work in your favor. Mini challenge: choose a line of the exam board specification for your subject and turn it into a flashcard. Be concise, meaningful and connect it to past knowledge. Reread this section to make sure it uses as much active recall as possible. 2. Summarization from memory. We all love notes. It's the process of copying up information from your textbook, classes and revision guides in long-form sentences. Notes are easy to do, can be made while blaring loud music and require little mental effort. And that's the issue. Notes don't often fulfill the active recall element of SARD revision and definitely don't equate to desirable difficulty. They're a useful foundation for further study but don't often count as revision themselves. However, a friendly first step to studying if you do love note-taking is to summarize with intention. Take your lengthy class notes and aim to condense them into a few essential lines. The trick to make this effective is to do it half from memory. Read through your class notes, perhaps check the textbook. And when you feel like you've got a good grasp, challenge yourself to summarize without just copying. Even if you're summarizing the information just a few minutes after reading it, this process of intentional recall is a good way to check your understanding, your ability to recall information and your knowledge of the key terms. If you can't remember how to spell Eyjafjallajökull volcano or explain that 5-slide PowerPoint in 3 summarized sentences, odds are you don't know it. Copying notes directly wouldn't have revealed that. If physically writing the summary takes too long, you can say it aloud, either to yourself or explain it to a friend. Actively teaching someone is another useful way to test your understanding. For example, watch a documentary related to a topic in your economics lesson, and then summarize the key facts from memory. Either write down your summary or tell a friend. This will test how well you understood the video as you are not copying up facts word for word. If you struggle to explain concepts to yourself, head to your textbook, read through the paragraphs and then summarize them again until you feel confident. This process might not teach you the exact wording the mark scheme needs, but it is very useful for the first stage of studying, understanding, and starting to learn the information. Mini challenge: now that you just read through how to use 2 study techniques, summarize them to yourself or a friend in a few sentences. How do you make effective flashcards? What is summarization? Why is it better than note-taking? 3. Chunking, chaining and telling a story. Chunking. In the cognitive neuroscience of memory, there is a useful technique for recall called chunking. Let's be honest. No one wants to memorize that 15-step process in physics. This method asks you to separate whatever information you're trying to learn into bite-sized nuggets that you then create individual associations to. Each chunk of information is made from dividing something large into small units which are related to each other, such as similar words, numbers or phrases. You actually do this naturally all the time because your brain can remember information better when it only needs to recall a few chunks. For example, the way that you remember your phone number is likely through chunking. If your number is 01427548659, it is difficult to recall the 7th number from memory when asked. But if I asked you to give me your whole phone number, you have learned to repeat the whole thing in a practiced way. Such American Samoa 01427-548 to 659. You have naturally chunked it into 3 parts without trying. Repeat your phone number to yourself and notice if you have naturally chunked it into parts. Equally, in Chapter 3 we learnt what makes a good evidence-based revision technique. With multiple aspects to human learning and lots of new information, it would be easy to leave this book and forget it all. Simply reading the text does not create footholds for you to remember long paragraphs. Instead, we broke all the information down into 4 elements, or 4 chunks, to create the simple acronym, SAAD. Each letter prompts your knowledge of the information in that section, such as S being a chunk for spaced repetition. Now you only have to remember what each letter stands for to suddenly have access to the whole chapter. This revision technique uses the second day of SARD revision techniques, associations. You are creating a rich association to the knowledge through chunking it into something more accessible. This is why mnemonics and acronyms like SARD are helpful ways to remember things. Chaining. Imagine, you're trying to learn a historical event for a history exam. You know how it started and you know a few details about it, but you have no idea how they connect. The facts are scrambled in your head and, of all the subjects, in history it is pretty important to prioritize chronology. Welcome to chaining. The idea is that you break down a process or event into a sequence of facts and associate each to the one before. Just as the question, "How are you?" prompts a response like, "Good," This technique is powerful because it means every fact naturally cues the recall of another. Telling a story. A way to use chaining and chunking together effectively is through storytelling. Creating a story forces you to break down lots of information into manageable pieces which connect to each other in a logical sequence. Give it a try. 1. Break down the process or event that you're trying to learn into 5 to 10 key details. 2. Create a story linking the details in order. Pretend you're telling a friend or sibling a summary of a novel or a bedtime fairy tale. If you're instead trying to learn a scientific process, treating essential facts like personified characters will add new depth to your learning. Another reason that turning facts into a story is successful for long-term memory retention is because you are creating more associations. Here, each part of the story is logically chained to the last and cues your recall of the next. Below is an example of storytelling to remember the process of water transport in the xylem. All keywords were taken from a mark scheme answer from a past paper in my syllabus. This is an effective way to remember an otherwise dull set of facts. Example of storytelling. The transport of water in the xylem. The clock struck midday. The peak time of water transportation in the plant. The guard cells, driven by an influx of water, conducted the grand opening of the stomata to a round of applause. Excited water molecules flew from the stomata in streams, thankful for the queen of transpiration letting them take on the journey from the soil to the surrounding air. As the first round of water molecules left, the plant sighed, grateful for the lower pressure at the top of the stem. But this created tension in the xylem. Which water molecules would be chosen next to journey through the plant? They clung to each other in the xylem in anticipation. Each water molecule was special. Each was dipolar, hugging their neighboring molecule with the companionable strength of hydrogen bonding. It was only because of the water molecule's cohesion that any of them would get to leave the stem. They had to work together. "I hope it's windy," one water molecule proclaimed. "Oh yes, the steeper the gradient, the better the queen of transpiration's sister evaporation will work. I hope it's sunny today." "Me too. That would mean more stomata are open. The queen of transpiration will be even faster." As the water molecules traveled up the dead cells of the xylem tube like a straw, the long root hair cells at the bottom of the plant welcomed new water molecules through osmosis. And so, in a process as passive as the sun shining on the fields, the queen of transpiration pulled and water was taken up. The plant heaved a sigh of relief. It would live to be hydrated another day. This technique truly makes revision fun. It is light-hearted, though admittedly time-consuming and not worth using for everything. But is a great way to break up long stints of working through past papers. You can also practice recalling the story through making mind maps or flowcharts and connecting facts to one another from memory. Storytelling counts as SARD revision when the story is repeated often and in expanding intervals. Spaced repetition requires you to recall the characters and storyline from memory. Active recall is built on prior knowledge and chained to the next step of the story, association, and uses a storyline which appropriately distills what you need to learn. Desirable difficulty. Happy storytelling. Mini challenge. Choose something that you've been struggling to learn and turn it into a story. Make awkward scientific terms the heroines, or business definitions the rules of an imaginary world. 4. Blurting. What sounds like your friend accidentally spilling secrets is actually the method that got me my S. Welcome to my all-time favorite technique. I was introduced to this by my wonderful A-level biology teacher who made it a priority to mentor students in her free time about the importance of effective revision. Without any prompting from my school, shout out to you, Mrs. Greenslade. You're the true revision queen. Ever since I introduced this on my YouTube channel, I receive daily messages from students whose studying has been revolutionized by this active recall technique. Unlike passively highlighting text or rereading class notes, blurting is one of the most efficient and effective ways to understand where you are at in your knowledge, and do something about it. To do this, take a concept or chapter you want to revise. 1. Write yourself a few prompts related to the topic to help jog your memory. 2. Without looking at any notes or your textbook, Write down everything you can remember from the chapter. Blurt out all your knowledge from memory. Detail processes, list out vocabulary. Define key terms, all of it. You can even set yourself a timer. 3. When you've written everything you can remember, compare your blurted knowledge to an official textbook, mark scheme or notes. Suddenly, you've got evidential proof of what you do and don't know. Did you recall things word for word? Were you actually able to explain that difficult concept, or did you just think you knew it? What did you leave out? Blurting is easy to put off because it is mentally taxing. It forces you to stare your knowledge in the face and be honest with where you're at, without the luxury of hiding behind a textbook. However, it is an essential self-assessment tool to show you what you need to spend more time on. The more you repeat blurting the same concepts, the stronger your knowledge in them will become. Blurting became my go-to technique for almost any subject, from recalling maths formulas to drama practitioners' theories. It saved me time and forced me to consolidate my knowledge. Example: to revise the process of river meander formation in geography, I've identified the following prompts of the chapter. Oxbow lakes. Erosion. Sediment. Blurted knowledge. The river's force causes the sides of the river to change shape. The higher the force, the more it changes shape. On the side with less force, there is more sediment. Over time, a meander forms. If the meander continues forming, it might become an oxbow lake. Comparison to official notes. The force of the water erodes and undercuts the river bank on the outside of the bend where water flow has most energy due to decreased friction. On the inside of the bend, where the river flow is slower, material is deposited as sediment, as there is more friction. Over time, the horseshoe becomes tighter, until the ends come very close together, as the river breaks through. For example, during a flood, the loop is cut off from the main channel. The cut-off loop is called an oxbow lake. Here, I can see that my knowledge of meander formation was shallow, so I need to go back and revise how friction is a causal factor. The differences between the inside and outside riverbank, and to include key terms like deposited. Without blurting my knowledge using active recall, I would not have known that I lacked this specificity. Now that I'm aware of the gaps in my knowledge, I can revise more effectively and try this process again tomorrow. Mini challenge: choose a chapter from any subject and practice blurting by writing down everything you can remember. Check your notes to see if you forgot any keywords. 5. Sherlock's Mind Palace. Yes, you read that right, Sherlock, as in, Sherlock Holmes. Who better to learn from than a fictional mastermind and genius detective? This technique is one of the most creative and effective I've ever tried. If used correctly, it's best for memorizing long processes, definitions that must be remembered word for word. Did someone say science mark schemes? And anchoring difficult to remember ideas to something more concrete. The idea is that you associate a word or sentence to a specific object or action. You anchor each part of a concept repeatedly until it is ingrained in your memory. When you need to recall the information, you use the objects or actions as a prompt to list off each element of the concept. Sherlock used this to remember small details by chaining information to a space he knew by heart, his house. He would imagine himself walking through his home, with each object in the room prompting a different fact. If he needed to remember a difficult piece of information, he could simply close his eyes and imagine his house, walking himself through the rooms of prompts. Suddenly, each detail would come back to him. This is also why a person's face triggers recall of their name. Your brain has actively associated their appearance to that word, and it is how you're able to remember the words for different objects in another language. You learn to connect the word chair to any physical object in that shape. Shakespeare's actors used this technique to remember their lines in the Globe Theatre. Actors engaged in a slow process of associating each line with a different detail of the theatre. Tracing their eyes down the left side of the furthest column might remind them of the words to be or not to be, while drawing their eyes along the next edge of the column reminded them of the other character's next line. This is how actors were able to memorize a new play in only a day. Now, I'm not saying you have to learn an entire Shakespeare play in one day to be, or not to be, a genius. but it is worth testing out this technique the next time you want to learn something lengthy. This technique is built on the 2 R's of SAD revision, active recall and association. Through associating new concepts to your existing knowledge of a physical space, you are creating rich retrieval cues to recall the information. Processes. Let's try and remember the following A-level politics process using Sherlock's Mind Palace. This process details how a new law is made in the UK Parliament. The process of a bill becoming an Act of Parliament. 1. Draft bill. A draft is issued for consultation before being formally introduced to Parliament. This allows changes and amendments to be made. 2. First reading. The bill is introduced, read out, to Parliament, with no debate or voting. 3. Second reading. A full debate takes place considering the details of the bill. 4. Committee stage. A public committee of MPs can make amendments to the bill. 5. Report stage. The committee reports its amendments to the Commons, which can agree to, or reverse, any changes. 6. Third reading. This is another full debate of the bill but no amendments can be made. Usually bills will be passed at this stage. 7. Second chamber. Once the bill is passed by the Commons, the same process takes place in the House of Lords. 8. Royal assent. Once passed by both chambers, the bill is given to the monarch to grant royal assent. Once this happens, the bill becomes law. Wow, hefty, right? The thought of learning a long process like this can feel overwhelming. Let's break it down. So you need to remember the 8 stages: draft bill, first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, third reading, second chamber and royal assent. In that order. To do this, imagine a space you know by heart. This could be your bedroom, your house, your garden or a school classroom. Let's imagine using your house. Imagine approaching your front door. Before you can put the key in the lock, you have to repeat to yourself, draft bill. You can imagine yourself pretending to open your door like a draft of the real thing. The image of your front door is the first cue. Imagine yourself turning the key once. First reading. Nothing happens with only one turn of the key, just like no debates happen within the first reading of a new bill in Parliament. Then turn the key again. Second reading. The door opens and you can go through. Just like Parliament will debate the bill on the second reading so it can go through to the next stage. Enter your hallway, or whatever room comes first in your house. Imagine your family members gathering to greet you as you come in. Committee stage. A group of people discuss and make changes to the bill, just like you and your family might discuss the day you've just had. When you see your family, you report how you feel to them. Report stage. Your family can make changes to your mood, just like the Commons can make changes to the bill once amendments are reported. Imagine yourself leaving the hallway and approaching the next door. You reach for the handle and turn it. Third reading. You no longer talk to your family and no changes can be made to what you said, just like how no further changes can be made to the bill at this stage. You enter the next room, second chamber. This space is different than your hallway, just like the House of Lords is different to the House of Commons. Finally, imagine going to sit on your sofa and feeling like a king or queen as you relax after a long day. Royal assent. Once passing both chambers, or both rooms in your house, the monarch confirms the bill and it becomes law. Suddenly, you have connected a process in its correct order to somewhere you know well. There is no way you can get the order mixed up because you are familiar with the order of rooms in your house. The process of how a bill becomes law is much more likely to stick in your long-term memory due to the rich retrieval cues you've created. Every time you come home after school, you can even repeat it to yourself because using spaced repetition will lodge it firmly in your long-term memory. In an exam, you can now close your eyes and simply imagine the journey through your house to recall the entire process. Facts. As you can see, Sherlock's Mind Palace is incredible for learning processes. However, one of the reasons Sherlock was able to remember so many niche facts was through associating them to different objects in his house. When you have abstract statistics, it is important to ground them in something physical if you're going to remember them. For example, I could choose the mirror by my bed as the first object. From now on, this mirror is associated with the fact The UK economy's GDP growth in 2016 was 1.8%. Sounds dry, sounds complex, but if every time you look at your mirror for the next few months you repeat this fact to yourself, it will become second nature. You can even put a post-it note on your mirror with this fact on it so you can check your knowledge every day. The idea is that Sherlock could mentally walk through his house in his mind and recall a fact with every object he pointed at. If you are a visual or spatial learner, this is incredibly effective, though it might seem like an unnecessarily long process to create the retrieval cues. You are saving time in the long run. Highlighting the same process in a textbook 50 times won't give you the foundation to recall it. Take the time now and you'll be so grateful when you see an exam question on exactly that process. 6. Object association, an extension of the mind palace. It's not just things in your home that can be used to help you remember facts and processes. Think about the individual details of any object you know well, even those you'll have in the exam hall. Object association is powerful when you successfully link any abstract idea you need to remember to something physical you know well. In other words, that rubber in your pencil case could be the secret to an A. When I learned about this technique, I started using objects I knew I would have with me during the exam. For example, I could remember key details about D&T iterative design from the different parts of my water bottle and the process of electromagnetic conduction from the lines of my pencil. Let me take you through how I learned the exact, word-for-word definition of the enthalpy of combustion using my pointer finger. Funny story, when I began writing this book, I hadn't recalled this definition in 2.5 years. Just for fun, I thought I'd test out my recall before reviewing the definition. I grabbed a piece of paper and took my brain through the process I built on object association using my finger for my A-level chemistry exam, writing out every word I could remember. Here it is. When I was finished, I checked my dusty revision notes and confirmed that I am the biggest nerd of all time. I know it almost word for word to this day. That is the long-term power of object association. Get ready to get creative. I wanted to remember the following definition. The standard enthalpy change of combustion is the enthalpy change when 1 mole of a compound is burned completely in oxygen under standard conditions, all reactants and products being in their standard states. Every element of this definition is necessary to receive full marks from the AC exam board in A-level chemistry, so I needed to put each word accurately into my long-term memory. Now what object did I know I'd have in the exam hall? My hand. I can feel you laughing at my insanity. Don't worry, I am too. Just remember that this technique was so useful I can still remember this rather dry definition to this day. Here we have my finger. The first phrase in the definition that I wanted to remember was, the standard enthalpy of combustion is the enthalpy change. For this, I traced around the tip of my finger in a circle. The concept of enthalpy change refers to energy and thermodynamics, and the movement of circling reminded me of an energetic change, making it memorable. I imagined that touching my finger to fire, related to combustion, would start this process. The next line is when 1 mole of a compound. When I ran my finger down my pointed finger, I would remember 1 mole of compound being combusted. The next part is burned completely in oxygen was associated with me tracing the shape of a circle around the base of my finger in the shape of an O for the element oxygen. To remember the essential phrase under standard conditions, I turned my hand round, still keeping my finger pointed, and traced my knuckle on the other side. To end the movement, I repeated what I did at the beginning in reverse by tracing a line up my finger to represent all reactants and products being in their standard states, and ended on tracing a circle above my fingertip. Going back to the start was a symbolic way for me to remember that everything involved in the process was also in its initial beginning state. Now, imagine I open the exam paper and see a gorgeous 3-mark question asking for the definition of the enthalpy change of combustion. I can simply trace round my finger and recall each line of the definition, word for word, with ease. I'd circle the fingertip, trace down the finger in a 1 shape, draw the O shape for oxygen, turn my hand and get it back to its original state. With each brush of my fingers, the words of the definition returned. I used to practice this process every day until I could do it in my sleep. Let's take another definition to practice. Seeing as this is the most dramatic technique of all time, it seems fitting to take an example from A-level drama. Imagine we want to remember the definition of the alienation effect. Alienation effect: theatrical techniques designed to remind the audience that they are watching a play and so distance them from identifying emotionally with the characters and events depicted. Central to the dramatic theories of Bertolt Brecht, here is an object that you will likely have in your exam, a simple pencil. From now on, start associating your pencil with the image of an alien to cue recall of the alienation effect. You can imagine pencil-shaped aliens or using the pencil to draw an alien. To recall the first words, theatrical techniques, you can move your finger around the tip of the pencil dramatically. Every time you circle it with pizzazz, think of being on stage in a theater. Then lightly prod the sharp pencil tip into the pad of your finger as though reminding the audience that the theater isn't real. Move your finger down the entire length of the pencil to distance the audience from the dramatic emotions at the tip. For the final part of the definition, you can associate the rubber at one end with removing any emotional attachment the audience has to the play, as though rubbing it away. Finally, to me, the name Brecht reminds me of break, so I would imagine the pencil lead breaking to remind me of this theater practitioner. Breaking the pencil is also a reminder of breaking the audience's attachment to the play. Now, when asked to recall this definition, I can dramatically circle the tip of the pencil, lightly press the point on my finger, distance my finger to the other end of the pencil and then touch the rubber to remind me of the last phrase, before imagining the pencil breaking. With ease, I just associated a lengthy definition to a retrieval cue I will have in the exam. Why does this strange technique work? Coming back to the framework of SARD revision techniques, this is grounded in association as it requires you to create rich retrieval cues and bring them back into your mind using active recall. Especially at the start, it is desirably difficult to remember the entire definition, so your brain must work actively. Try it yourself on that definition you always forget or the process you feel like you have no hope of remembering. Focus on the keywords and start adding the parts of the definition piece by piece to areas on an object in front of you. How can you connect the words and phrases you need to know to the parts of the object? I recommend taking 10 minutes to associate the concept with an object or even your hand to creatively insert it into your long-term memory. Practice recalling one more step each time. Eventually, you'll stop checking the definition and instead just choose the object to remember the phrases. Use spaced repetition to reinforce your associated concept regularly until you don't even have to think about it anymore. You only have so many objects and well-known places to use, so use this sparingly but know that is highly effective. You've got this, Sherlock. Application. Now that you've had a go at more deeply learning the information, it's time for the part that will get you marks. Application. You see, most exam papers don't just ask you to recall a few definitions and repeat them for top grades. The best marks come from answering questions which don't always have obvious answers. It might be a brand new essay question asking about a book character who only appears in one chapter. It might be a maths question which looks impossible, only because it's hiding that it wants you to use a process you know very well. To bridge the gap between just knowing the information and being able to retrieve it and use it, we need to practice application. This is desirably difficult after learning the content, an important part of SARD revision techniques. This section will go through the different ways of testing your existing knowledge, such as using textbook questions, past papers and writing essays. Remember, the academic system is a game, the players, you and the exam boards. The nature of the game is that even if you know the concepts, you only score a point if it's written the exact way the exam board has specified. It doesn't matter if you have a niche understanding of the physics of supernova stars or artistic skills worthy of display in the Louvre. If you don't present your knowledge how the mark scheme wants you to, you won't win. Now, I could write a whole book about how this is problematic. About how we're not encouraged to think critically but confine ourselves to parroting information in a set way, which is no way to measure intelligence or foster curiosity. However, like I said, This is a game. You are a player, and you came to win. Winning is about understanding exactly what the exam board wants and giving it to them. The only way you can do this is to familiarize yourself with the language they use, the words they want to hear, and how questions are structured. The solution? Past papers. Past paper questions differ between essay, practical and mathematical subjects. There are both short-form and long-form questions to tackle. You can find past papers on the exam board's website, in your end-of-chapter tests at school, and on legacy sites which compile resources. Ask your teacher if they know any for your subject. We'll also go through different ways of accessing questions and, most importantly, how to get the most out of the process. If you just do one thing after reading this book, pick up past papers. Make mark schemes your lifeblood and examiners' reports your bedtime reading. Just kidding. Bit overkill. But using past paper questions, that's how you'll smash those exams. 7. Textbook questions and revision guides. But before you leap right into past papers, start by using the first application resource at your disposal. Every textbook for your syllabus should provide practice questions as you're learning the content. These are a great way to test your knowledge on the ground. After every class, make sure you can answer these questions, either on paper or in your head. The answers can often be found at the back of the textbook and are useful to check in with yourself. Did you actually understand the lesson? If you're struggling, either reread your notes or ask a teacher for help. Also make use of revision guides for your exam board. Choose up-to-date ones that map to your curriculum, are relatively short and easy to use, but beware the cringy puns you find in so many of them. Plus, remember they're a starting point but not necessarily the way of accessing the highest grades. Make it a habit to revisit textbook and revision guide questions even months after you covered the material in class. Due to the forgetting curve of human memory discussed back in Chapter 3, you'd be surprised how differently you approach them with time. Regularly revisit these bite-sized questions to refresh your understanding. The most important tip is not to read your notes or a lesson summary before answering the questions, even though it's tempting. In doing so, you'll only be testing your short-term memory, and you want to know what is already lodged in your brain. If you are doing these questions before you have done much revision, it will probably mean you don't know that many of the answers. That's totally fine. The process of sitting down and dragging information back to your mind is strengthening the synaptic connections in your brain to that old knowledge. You're telling your brain to sort through its many ring binder folders of concepts in search of the right one. You can read the lesson summary afterwards to see what your brain didn't manage to retrieve for you. Top tips for practice questions. When practicing questions in the textbook, get good at recognizing the command words. These are the first verbs you see, and they normally require different things. It's like a hint from the exam board about what they are asking of you. Here are some common ones below and what they mean. State, for example, state the definition on the enthalpy change of combustion. The exam boards want you to express in clear terms. This answer normally does not require why, how or an example. Simply write down the definition you've learned with as many keywords as possible. If it's 2 marks, make sure to write down at least 2 statements. If it's 3 marks, write down 3, and so on. Other command words with a similar meaning: give, identify, outline, explain. For example, using figure 12 and your own knowledge, explain how different landforms may be created by the transport and deposition of sediment along the coast. Explain questions are beasts. Here, they don't just want you to list out your knowledge. They want you to detail purposes or reasons, work out why something is the way it is, and discuss the causal factors. Again, if it's a 3-mark question, write at least 3 points. Describe, for example. Describe examples of women's work during the First World War. Unlike explaining why or how something is the way it is, describing merely means stating what is there and laying out characteristics. Justify, for example, transnational corporations, TNCs, only bring advantages to the host country. Do you agree with this statement? Justify your decision. This type of question could be worth many marks and often involves ethical debates. When you see this word, make sure to support a case with evidence. To what extent, For example, to what extent do urban areas in lower-income countries, LICs, or newly emerging economies, NEs, provide social and economic opportunities for people? For subjects like geography, this command phrase is asking you to judge the importance or success of a strategy, scheme or project. For subjects like English literature, it's asking you to weigh up how much you agree with something. Add in some spaced repetition to elevate your long-term retention. Repeat these questions again at increasingly longer intervals. SAD questions just became a SAD revision technique. 8. Practice essays. Throwback to A-level English literature. There's nothing I wanted to do less than go through the effort of writing a whole essay. It was taxing enough to memorize book quotes or page references, analyze and reanalyze poems and read a novel for the 100th time. Did somebody say Wuthering Heights, The Great Gatsby, Of Mice and Men? I love literature, but there's something about studying books in school that butchers the fun of reading. However, the best thing to do to get you ready for exams in essay subjects is, you've guessed it, write essays. There are so many elements to writing a good essay, from the organizational structure, to getting the timing right, to creating an optimal essay outline, to including enough quotations or references, let alone worrying if the content is creative or relevant to the question. How to write practice essays for any subject. Use past paper questions. I recommend saving the most recent papers to practice with near to your real exam, but any other questions you can get hold of are worth using. For English literature, you want to be well prepared for questions related to characters, themes, settings and relevant historical events. If you can't find a past paper question that tackles all of these elements, either create one yourself or ask your teacher to prepare you a practice question. Always time yourself, even in the early days, or if you're just practicing essay writing for quality rather than an exam scenario, it is useful to measure how long it roughly takes you to process the question. Always plan your essay, write an outline, pick apart quotes of choice, create a running thread to tie the essay together and give yourself a helpful roadmap. I know many people who don't plan essays. There was a time when I was one of them, but I can wholeheartedly say that planned essays are better essays. Even if you meander, spontaneously add points or go in a new direction, the clarity of an overall plan is essential, especially under timed conditions. Organization and structure. Following on from creating a plan, your essay should have a clear, easy-to-follow structure. Think about traveling to Paris. You want to follow regular, logical signposts to get you from A to B. You know what your destination is the whole time, and all the travel routes on the way are supporting the journey. An essay without a structure is like aiming for Paris but taking 100 detours and ending up at the fake Eiffel Tower in Las Vegas. Just not as magical. How you structure your essay depends on the conventions of the subject, the topic and number of marks in a given question. Every essay has a macro structure and a micro structure. The macro structure is its overall formation. It is how your essay flows at a high level. We love a solid introduction or topic sentence, body paragraphs which explore your idea using lots of evidence, and a gorgeous conclusion which ties together all your points in a summary, without adding anything new. Ask your teacher for specific advice about the best structure for your subject. For example, a comparative essay between two texts could use a diamond macro structure like this. In this structure, each black dot represents a well-written body paragraph. What makes it a successful comparison is that we are consistently digging into the similarities with evidence from both texts, discussing differences between them with an in-depth analysis of each, and once again tying it all together with the given question. The microstructure of an essay is how each of these body paragraphs are written. There are many frameworks you can use to be successful, but it's always a good idea to introduce a relevant point with a topic sentence, back it up with evidence, and then provide an in-depth explanation of why it answers the question. This basic structure is often referred to as peel, point, evidence, explanation and link back to the question. P. Point. Introduce the topic you are going to discuss in this paragraph with one clear sentence. E. Evidence. Support your point with examples, such as facts and statistics, figures, research findings, and quotes from the text. Choose evidence you can expand upon. E. Explanation. Show your understanding of how your given evidence supports the main point and why you have a strong argument. L. Link to the question or context. Reinforce your original point and make sure it is relevant to the given question. You can also provide a transition to the next topic or paragraph. The most essential part of any PIL paragraph is the explanation, where you dig into why your chosen evidence supports your argument. Let's look at an example. The question is, should animals be kept in zoos? P. It is cruel to take animals away from their natural habitats. E. As shown in the text, studies suggest that animals kept in captivity become bored. They can also develop a condition called zoochosis where they anxiously rock back and forth. E. The fact that animals develop these conditions in captivity, but not in the wild, suggests they are not meant to be kept in restrictive enclosures. Even if zoos are enjoyable for humans, they cause suffering to the animals in them. L. Therefore, animals should not be kept in zoos because it is cruel to subject to them to inevitable suffering. This very simple paragraph has been broken down into its PIL structure. The explanation could be further developed, such as considering the alternative side of human enjoyment in more depth, but overall this framework ensured that the given question was approached with credible evidence. To access higher marks, the PIL structure is just your starting point. It is important to be flexible and use more than one piece of evidence for the same point. For example, one way to creatively reach higher marks in English is to begin by identifying the literary device as your evidence, but then develop your argument with word-level analysis, sentence structure analysis or alternative interpretations. This will hammer home the point you are making. Ask your teacher for advice on which macro and micro structure works best for the demands of your subject. Whatever you do, make sure you are factoring organizational structure into how you write your essays. Point me in the direction of the real Eiffel Tower. Always use a range of words for suggests. When your essay hinges on use of sources, figures or literary texts, the odds are you will have to infer meaning from them, rather than repeating the same word. Pikachu, I choose you, again. Memorize a list of sophisticated synonyms, such as highlights, shows that, signifies, connotes, indicates, implies, proves that. Always ask someone to give you feedback on your essay. Half the learning is writing the essay, the other half is understanding how you actually did. There's a beautiful bias called the IKEA effect, inspired by the store's flat pack furniture that customers have to build themselves using a set of instructions. Research has shown that humans always overvalue their own creations, and an IKEA customer will value the table they put together themselves over an identical table they purchased ready-made, because clearly that wonky cabinet your dad put together is art. Similarly, you will overvalue an essay you've written more than one written by someone else. So to overcome this, you need an objective second opinion. I understand it can feel scary, or seem like extra work, to reach out to a teacher and ask them to review your essay, but you need to do it. There is nothing more valuable than tangible feedback on your writing. Unlike science or maths, where answers are defined by a mark scheme, essay-based subjects are wonderfully subjective. Top tip for essays: relevance. When you have so many good ideas and things to talk about, it's easy to write an essay that answers the question you wanted to be asked as opposed to the one that is actually on the paper, because yes, if I write an essay about different breeds of dog, I will get full marks. Relevance is one of the most important elements of a good essay response. I learned this the hard way. No matter how many quotes, historical evidence or fancy vocabulary you include, if it doesn't answer the given question, it won't get you the marks. I recommend starting and ending every paragraph with a direct tie into the question. Find ways of rewording the essay question into your response and make sure it remains central to the points you are making. For example, if the question asks, explain how Shakespeare created feelings of guilt in Act 1, Scene 2 of Othello, you can start your paragraph with, Shakespeare's use of sighs helps the audience feel a sense of guilt in this scene. The next paragraph could start with, the stage directions in Act 1, Scene 2 use body language to demonstrate Desdemona's feelings of guilt to the audience. This will keep you on track, as it will remind you what you are supposed to be writing about, and it will highlight to the examiner that you are directly addressing the question you've been asked. 9. Timed essay plan. So maybe you don't have time to write a whole essay. That's okay, you're not lazy, you might just be smart. One of my favorite revision techniques is planning an essay exactly as though you're going to write it, including all the relevant quotations and trains of thought, and time it. Force yourself to pretend that you will answer this question in an exam scenario. Not only does this teach you to streamline your essay outlines to a set time, for example, 5 minutes, but you are using active recall of your existing knowledge to approach the given question, whether you write the full essay or not. But that's the thing, how do you write a good essay plan? I remember asking my GCSE English teacher that exact question in Year 10. Up until then, I'd been winging essays. They were a fun combination of spontaneous thoughts and shoving in anything relevant like I was playing whack-a-mole. The most useful first step to learning to plan essays is to start at the end. Take an existing essay you've written, preferably one which got a good mark, and deconstruct it to see how you structured it. In other words, produce an essay plan based on the essay you have already written, rather than the other way around. This reverse outline is useful to identify how your thoughts evolved, which pieces of evidence you brought in to support your points, and ultimately if your essay is coherent. This is an efficient way to assess how well you built on your ideas, or, conversely, scattered them. Now look at your reverse outline and think about what it shows you about what you put into your essay. You normally have an introduction, or at least a tropic sentence, body paragraphs that present and build upon related ideas, and a conclusion that relates everything back to the question and ties up your analysis with a bow. Are these elements present and are they working well together? Have you used enough evidence? Notice whether the paragraphs link well to one another or if there are big jumps or loose ends. This book is not aiming to teach you how to write a good essay. This is a nuanced art that varies from subject to subject and person to person. You would really need a whole book to cover that. They do exist, but in the time it takes you to read it you could be practicing your own essay questions and developing your technique. And it was definitely consistently practicing essay plans and deconstructing my essays after I'd written them that helped me get the top percentage in essay-based subjects. Challenge yourself, put away the notes and the distractions, set a timer and plan a new essay. You'll learn a lot. 10. Past papers, and how to learn from them. To write this, I just watched the video I made on past papers when I was 17. Baby me was so cute. I've lost count of the number of times I nervously flicked my hair. It's funny how we grow and evolve. Regardless of mini Jade's hair flicking, she had some decent points. Past papers are the most underused resource in the game, and not because we don't do them but because we're not taught how to learn from doing them. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you get 80% or 30%. This actually says little about how good you are. It's all about what you do next. How will you use this incredible evaluation tool to learn what you didn't know? Make it a habit to do more with your end-of-chapter tests than simply reading them and shoving them in a drawer. Most end-of-chapter tests are made up of old past paper questions, so learning from them is like gold dust. They are a hint of what your real exam will look like. From the wording of the mark scheme, to the layout, to the types of questions. Schedule a meeting with your teacher to go through any questions you got wrong, particularly when you still don't understand how to get full marks. You can even ask to do end-of-chapter papers again a few weeks later just to make sure you understand everything. One framework I used to evaluate my past papers, especially in science subjects, was the acronym MARKS. Shout out to my biology teacher again for this one. Each letter is an explanation for why you lost the mark. How can you fix your knowledge unless you know why it went wrong? After every test, I'd make it a habit to spend 3 minutes flicking through my past paper, marking every question with a letter as to why I got it wrong. The MARKS acronym became so deeply ingrained in my head that I would scribble M's and C's and R's on my paper with ease. M. Maths error. You got a question wrong due to an issue with your maths. Maybe it was a silly mistake with the numbers or you didn't know the formula. A. Application. You lost the mark because you didn't understand the application context of the question. These questions are generally worth the most marks and understandably challenging. Read the question. RTQ, otherwise known as a silly mistake. R means you didn't read the specifics of the question. Did you answer another essay question, or define a different process? C. Communication. You knew your stuff, you were on the right lines, but you did not express your thoughts sufficiently clearly. K. Knowledge. You just don't know the content in this topic well enough. I recommend going back to number 5 and the learning a methods earlier and blurting your knowledge to identify gaps in it. S. Statement. The question was a 2-marker but you only gave 1 point, or the question was a whopping 6-marker and you only wrote 2 lines. This reason is easy to fix but equally annoying when done wrong. Always check the number of marks on offer. After hastily marking your past paper under this framework, tally up how many of each letter you wrote. All of a sudden, you now know the primary reason this paper went wrong, whether your maths knowledge is the reason you lost marks, or you never wrote enough statements to get all the points. You can work on this for the next past paper you do. The final and the most important step is to write yourself a summary note on the front of the paper with action items, based on your marks analysis. What will you do now? For example, practice questions on Chapter 6 or go over this definition. Moving these action items from your paper to your to-do list is the only way they'll get tackled. For every past paper you do, don't miss out on the opportunity to learn from it. It'll help you out, I promise. If you don't study science, you can easily come up with a similar framework to evaluate your past papers with. Identify common reasons you lose marks, perhaps relating to specific topics or concepts, and tally them up. This is where you need to focus your energy. Mini challenge. Go through a past paper or end of chapter test that you did recently and evaluate it using the marks framework. What is the main reason you lost marks? How can you change your revision strategy to go through these areas in more depth? Past papers are the new textbook. Finally, I recommend using past paper mark schemes and examiners' reports to inform your flashcards and notes. They can be found for free online if you search the exam board and subject. If you're going to invest so much time and energy memorizing information, it better be the right information. Work the mark scheme into your summarized notes. For example, when I made flashcards about a certain topic, I would skim through past papers to find questions related to that topic. You can use Ctrl+F on your laptop as a shortcut key to search key terms from that chapter and see if there are questions about it. Remember, if exams are a game, it's not just about how much you know but how you express what you know in the way they want. Become one with the mark scheme, and there you have it. My top 10 SARD-approved revision recommendations to make the most out of your study time. We love highlighting, sure. We love rereading, yes. But your grades won't love it. Unfortunately, your knowledge won't just appear unless you work for it. So test out these techniques and find out which ones work best for you. You've got this. If you have revision techniques which work for you but aren't listed here, that's great. Ask yourself, does it fit into the understanding, learning or application phase of studying? Use the SARD framework from Chapter 3 to make sure it's effectively optimizing how you learn. I dare you to go and practice one of the new revision techniques above. Test it out on something you've been struggling to remember for a while, or apply your knowledge in a past paper if you're feeling confident. Before we move on, let's come back to our initial diagnosis of English literature at the start of this chapter and work out how we would use these techniques to tackle it. Through identifying the phase of revision of each requirement, understand, learn or apply, and specific techniques to tackle it, you are one step closer to planning effective revision. Requirement action phase of revision, understand/learn/apply. Revision techniques, be confident analyzing and using different literary devices, e.g. metaphors. Alliteration 1, memorize the names of enough literary devices and practice identifying them. 2, practice writing pieces and including literary devices. 1, understand and learn. 2, apply. 1, flashcards. On one side, write an example of the literary device being used, and then flip it over to see the name. This uses active recall and spaced repetition when repeated at set intervals. 2, Practice essays and essay plans. This moves on to the application phase and is of desirable difficulty. Write essays analyzing the use of literary techniques, or creative writing pieces to practice using them. Get a teacher to give you feedback. Know the conventions of different forms of text, e.g. letter, poem, short story. 1. Memorize conventions. 2. Practice writing pieces using conventions. 3. Practice analyzing texts of each form. 1. Learn. 2. Apply. 3. Apply. 1. Flashcards or blurting. 2. Practice essays. 3. Practice essays. Know quotes from the set text and use them effectively to infer meaning. 1. Memorize quotes. 2. Practice analyzing these quotes in an essay. 1. Learn. 2. Apply. 1. Flashcards, blurting, chaining and storytelling. Object association to learn quotes. Repeat quotes to yourself regularly using spaced repetition. 2. Practice essay and essay plans. Put IT in practice. Diagnose a subject or chapter of choice. What do you need to be able to do? Understand processes, recall facts, analyze and use certain techniques. Ask yourself which phase of revision each requirement is in. Identify which revision techniques are best suited to this action. Most of all, try out the techniques. Get confident in everything from blurting, to making effective flashcards, to analyzing past papers with the Marks framework. You've got this. Advice from Holly Gabrielle. Hey everyone, I'm Holly, or Holly Gabrielle in the world of social media. After spending 3 years at the University of Cambridge studying biological natural sciences, which included intense 3-hour exams supervised by professors in gowns and 5 days of back-to-back finals, optimizing my revision had to be a priority. Whilst I started developing this system in school, which helped me reach my all grades at GCSE and A-level, I only found this key 3-step process as an undergraduate biologist. Step 1. Identify your knowledge gaps. Any efficient revision strategy should always involve highlighting your weak points and what you don't already know. I usually do this by scribbling down anything and everything that I can remember from a particular topic, on plain or scrap paper. Trust me, it's not going to be a framed piece of artwork, and then I'll compare this to my study notes to track down the missing pieces of the jigsaw. This is an example of blurting. Step 2. Flashcards. What do I write on a flashcard? Is a very commonly asked question when it comes to revising, but here's my solution. Transfer only your knowledge gaps to a carefully crafted pile of flashcards. Write the question or prompt on the front and answer on the back. Problem solved. Step 3. Summary sheets. At the apex of my revision funnel, I'll create a summary sheet on plain A4 paper, and this is what I'll be using to revise from just before an exam. This is dedicated to only the information that I simply struggle to remember. Attempting to go over everything you've learned the night before an exam is neither a healthy goal nor manageable task, and so this is why I find summary sheets to be immensely powerful. These methods work incredibly well for me, and I'd perhaps even go as far as saying I love the process. The repetition and rigor of revision takes discipline, but I know it's always worth it in the end. Whilst my system may be something you'd like to try, I encourage you to discover one that works best for you. Finding revision techniques that allow you to achieve your best results will also take time, so don't be scared to get creative and do a bit of experimenting as you journey through your studies. Good luck and keep smiling, you're doing an amazing job. Chapter 5, IT's Time for Timetables. 8 p.m. Revise Chemistry. 8:02 p.m. Mental Breakdown. 8:03 p.m. Try to pull myself together. 8:04 p.m. Flick through notes, or Instagram. 8:05 p.m. Call it a day. I worked too hard. I was raised on my dad asking me, what are the 5 P's of success, to which I would groan, roll my eyes and pretend that those 5 words hadn't become ingrained in my skull over the last 2 decades. Perfect planning prevents poor performance. Ah yes, the 5 words which are so easy to understand, yet so hard to internalize. Welcome to Chapter 5, the key to unlocking productivity through planning. This chapter will help you to establish an effective study routine, Set achievable study goals and hold yourself accountable for your deadlines. Whether you're a long-term planner or a night-before crammer, knowing how to timetable your life is an essential skill for when you need to power through your work. When I was doing my GCSEs, I had 12 different subjects. That's 5 lessons a day, 150 plus modules, 24 exams. The thought of revising for that made me shudder. It still does. No, thank you. I was first introduced to the idea of study timetables by my good friend Ruby Granger, a fellow YouTuber in the space of studying and productivity. Ruby is incredibly effective at managing her time. Timetabling is the cue that stops you thinking about work and start doing it. It invites you to prioritize, create a high-level plan for your life based on deadlines and assign appropriate lengths of time to each task until they're all done. It's a way of making 24 exams feel slightly more manageable and empowers you to spend your time well. One of the key secrets here is practice. The more often you plan your time, the better you get at estimating how long tasks take you. Maybe the thought of timetabling makes you shudder. I know I had tried it before, felt the stress of not having completed everything on my list and subsequently abandoned the plan every day thereafter. But when I collated advice from tens of top students at GCSE and A-level, I found all of them had a revision timetable of some kind. First, we'll review how to go about creating a study timetable, then we'll review some of the classic do's and don'ts and look at how to transform a list of tasks into an effective plan. The process of timetabling has 3 main guiding forces: the urgency of each topic in terms of your current level of understanding, the urgency of action based on upcoming deadlines, and, finally, balance. It is so important to be mindful of your mental health, scheduling sufficient breaks and making time for social activities. Here are the questions you should be asking yourself for each stage. It's easy to read this chapter, nod at the words and feel like it makes sense. However, timetabling takes practice, and learning from inevitable failure. Even if it's not currently exam season, I dare you to create a revision schedule for tomorrow after reading this chapter. The earlier you can master this habit, the more it'll help you when stressful times hit. 1. What are your priority areas? There is a famous quote from Peter Drucker, a business leader, which says, "If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it." All the topics you need to revise are a scattered web in your mind. Without detailing each one and quantifying your progress, you cannot actively improve how you tackle them. Are there certain subjects where you need to achieve a certain grade to progress into what you plan to do next? Or is there one area that stands out as needing some work? For example, did your recent end-of-chapter test reveal that you are tragic at French? Be honest with yourself, as it is the only way you'll be able to effectively timetable your subjects. You have a limited amount of time before exams, and it's important to allocate it efficiently. Before you can start timetabling, you need to understand what you don't know. If I can name every song on the UK Top 50 charts and reasonably tell you how well I know the lyrics, then why can't I tell you how well I know my subjects? The best way to do this is to rank your understanding of every little topic. In the Easter holidays before my GCSE exams, I wrote a list of every topic in every subject in an Excel spreadsheet. Yep, all of them. I went on the exam board's websites for every subject I was taking to make sure I had the right information. Initially, this was overwhelming. I stared at the seemingly endless list as though starting secondary school anew. However, I then color-coded each one based on how strong I felt on the content. Instantly, I started discarding topics that did not need my attention. If I could go through a flashcard set with ease, this topic was not worth deep practice. I focused on areas I didn't understand or had performed poorly in. Don't be generous. If you don't understand a topic, brutally mark it with urgency, whether you enjoy revising it or not. I had a simple traffic light system of green, amber and red. Green meant it needed very little attention, amber required moderate revision, and dark red was a problem point which begged more time. I then added a new column to my spreadsheet, actions. In this, I detailed the strategies I intended to use to get my problem areas to green, using SARD techniques like flashcard sets and past papers. Telling myself what I would do revealed to me where I did not have sufficient resources. Had I made flashcards for that topic yet? Did I understand the content, or would I need to see a teacher? Be honest with yourself and don't skip this phase. You can't create a plan without first knowing where to direct your energy. I also added a simple last reviewed and next review section to aid my spaced repetition process. Flick back to chapter 3 for a refresh of this. Knowing when I last revised certain concepts was incredibly helpful in planning effective future revision. Here's an example of what the prioritization process looked like. 2. Draft up a timetable. There are a range of different tools you can use to create timetables. There are calendar functions on Notion, which is a website and app that helps you get organized, and study apps like My Study Life. You can drop tasks directly into your Google Calendar or, of course, use pen and paper in a notebook or bullet journal. I went through most of secondary school only using paper timetables and Excel spreadsheets, but I've fallen in love with my Google Calendar and Notion setup at university. Whatever works for you is best. Experiment, try out a few things, but, most importantly, start. How detailed you make the table is up to you. I recommend having a time-to-time setup as the first column so that you can get specific with how long tasks will take you. Scheduling an event from 7:15 p.m. 8 p.m. is more realistic than simply writing complete this evening. 3. What else is going on in your life? Fill in any mandatory extracurricular activities, events or classes for the week. I blocked off time for school activities and social activities. Color coding is useful to see how you are dividing your time. For example, if sports practice is green, breaks are yellow and revision sessions are red, you can see if you are incorporating a good balance of breaks with just one glance. Are you spending sufficient time relaxing and socializing? When can you find stress-free time to revise? 4. When do you work best? Call me crazy, but early mornings are my thing. If I wanted to work most optimally, it meant getting up at 5 or 6 a.m. and studying with deep focus for a few hours before school. Everyone is different, but there are always times in the day that are less optimal. For example, the post-lunch afternoon slump is a real phenomenon for many, so you might not power through an essay at 2 p.m. Studies suggest that early mornings bring enhanced clarity. In planning your study sessions in advance, you can commit to an early night beforehand and get ready to smash the next day. Whenever you work best, position your most important tasks at those times. Let's just say, if I had tried to write my homework essays at 2 a.m., my teacher would have ended up reading gibberish. I am proudly not a night owl. Early birds unite. 5. Stick to the timetable as best you can, but adapt it as you practice, especially at the start. Timetables should be flexible. Did going over those flashcards take you 15 minutes as planned, or 45 minutes? Note that down for next time to help with your planning. The planning fallacy. If you're still struggling to estimate how long things are taking you, don't stress. It turns out that us humans are pretty bad at predicting how long things take us because we have a tendency to underestimate tasks and overvalue our abilities. This is called the planning fallacy. It's an optimistic bias towards thinking things take less time than they do. One trick to help you create better estimates for future timetables is what personal development blogger Steve Pavlina coined, the fudge ratio. It takes into account the planning fallacy and gives you a numerical value to make better predictions. 1. Write down everything you need to do. 2. Estimate how long each task will take you. Don't think too much, just guess. 3. Complete the tasks while timing how long they take you. Write down this exact number. 4. Divide this actual task time by your estimate. This is your personal fudge ratio. For example, I always underestimated how long it would take me to write flashcards. I would write down my estimate, a confident 10 minutes, to create the whole deck for a topic. In reality, it took me 30 minutes. Using basic maths, aka a few lazy taps on my phone calculator app, I would determine my fudge ratio as 30 minutes. 10 minutes equals 3. Now I know that for a similar task of writing flashcards, I should probably multiply whatever my intuitive estimate is by 3. Eventually, you develop a new, more accurate intuition. You'll have a better understanding of how long tasks actually take you and be able to make more actionable timetables. The don'ts of timetabling. Here are the many mistakes I made in my timetabling journey, so that you don't have to. This section is a game of spot the mistake. Take a look at each timetable and try to guess the fundamental flaw. When you make your next study plan, come back to this list and double-check you're not falling prey to these simple pitfalls. May the timetabling be with you. Time-to-time scheduling without shuffling time in between. 7:15 am 7:25 am. Go over Chapter 5 Computer Science Flashcards. 7:25 am 7:45 am. Write an essay plan for English literature homework. Have a look at the snapshot of one of my old study timetables above. Can you see what the issue is? This appears to be a clear plan, especially because I took the time to focus on priority subjects and do it at a time I would be most effective. However, the timings are continuous. I am going straight from one task at 7:25 am to another at the same time. I have not left any time in between these activities. If I am revising computer science, there is no way my flashcards will magically put themselves away and be replaced by an English literature essay as the clock strikes 7:25 am. In reality, you need shuffling time, aka that dead 2 to 5 minutes when you put your books away. Take a sip of water and find your next round of revision notes. All I needed to do to make this timetable successful was to start my next task at 7:30 am instead of 7:25 am. By affording myself 5 minutes between tasks, I'm leaving myself room for the first tasks to run a little bit over and time to shuffle the next study activity into place. Too rigid. 8:30 p.m. 8:37 p.m. Complete 5 pages of maths homework for tomorrow's class. 8:40 p.m. 8:50 p.m. Research Picasso's painting Guernica and write down my interpretation. Yet another deceptive example. This time, I did my best. I knew it would be a productive day. I was full of optimism and good study energy, even though I knew that my maths homework would take me at least 15 minutes. Surely with the pressure of my 100-plus task to-do list, I could get it done in 7. Welcome to the fallacy of optimism. Until you know how long it really takes you to get things done, be pessimistic. Always schedule more time than you know you need for a task. If you think it'll take between 10 and 15 minutes, be generous. Give it 20. There is no better feeling than being ahead on your timetable, and the only way you can achieve this is by being more realistic with your timings. Too vague. 9:00 p.m. 9:25 p.m. Revise history. 9:30 p.m. 9:50 p.m. Learn more Spanish. Now this one is obvious, and yet this is a mistake I make to this day. Imagine how overwhelmed I was when I settled into my desk, ready to slay my revision, only for my timetable to tell me that I needed to revise history. What did I mean? Was I to sit and revise every account of every world war, coronation and international treaty? It is tempting not to plan the specifics of your revision because that takes time and energy. While it is a good idea to make an overview of your week with time blocked off for certain subjects, the way to make your timetable most helpful is by specifying which area of a subject you are going to tackle. Which modules do you feel less comfortable with? What type of revision method would help you here? Make sure your revision is a little less sad and a lot more sad. The more you think about the specifics of a task in advance, the less friction there is to just starting. So invest the time in making your timetable specific. Giving up on the timetable when you miss one task. 10:00 p.m. 10:25 p.m. Blurred organic chemistry mechanisms in Chapter 3. 10:30 p.m. 10:45 p.m. Go over Quizlet set for new Spanish vocab. 10:50 p.m. 10:55 p.m. Abandoned. If you're a perfectionist like me, this might be tough to hear. Brace yourself. You are never going to stick to your timetable perfectly. There will always be tasks which run over, concepts you thought you understood but don't, or even surprise events which mean you can't do any of that night's planned revision. That's okay. Missing the odd task doesn't say anything about you. What does say something about you is what you choose to do next. If you've missed 2 or 3 tasks, do you decide to abandon the whole timetable from now on and watch Netflix? If you've failed once, you'll likely fail again, right? It's surprising that a productivity tool which was meant to bring me so much ease actually started making me more stressed. The idea of not sticking to my plan brought up feelings of low self-worth, hopelessness and a monumental fear of failure. When you treat your timetable like the Holy Grail, you are destined to fail. What I had to learn was while it might feel like the timetable dictates your life, you dictate the timetable. If you need to change something around, move a task to the next day or scribble out this evening's plans and start afresh, go for it. Don't be as perfectionistic as 16-year-old Jade and think that one loss on your timetable has to impact the whole day. Check in with your plan, notice where you're at, reshuffle, learn from it. Not scheduling breaks and other life activities. The final don't is all about hustling too hard. We've somehow been taught along our school career that the longer we spend revising, the better. In reality, it's meaningful breaks that allow us to spend time more productively. Just like you schedule your revision tasks, make sure to schedule dedicated time to relax. The do's of timetabling. I'm sure by now you can guess some of the do's. Do give yourself breaks. Do make your timetable flexible and generous. Do adapt your timetable as you go on, stick with it even if you miss the odd task. Do make your timetable based on priority subjects and modules. Do plan tasks at the times of the day you are most effective. I'll never admit it, but my dad was right. Planning does prevent poor performance and stress. Before you move on to chapter 6, make this chapter meaningful. Get out a pen and paper, a trusty notebook or use a study app and make yourself a timetable for tomorrow. Factor in when you have school and other commitments, identify what you want to get done and see how effective you can be when you plan these activities into your day. Every